Hello everyone, and welcome back to Midnight Horror. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. Story 1. The mansion stood at the edge of town, hidden behind overgrown trees and a rusting iron gate. I had passed it countless times, always wondering what lay beyond its boarded-up windows and crumbling walls. That afternoon, curiosity got the best of me, and I found a way inside through a side door hanging loosely on its hinges. The interior smelled of dust and decay, the air thick with the weight of abandonment. My footsteps echoed as I moved through the grand foyer, my flashlight cutting through the dimness. Cobwebs clung to the chandeliers, their crystals dulled with age. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls, curling at the edges like paper burned at the corners. The silence pressed against me, heavy and suffocating, as if the house had been waiting for someone to disturb it. As I wandered deeper, I found a hallway lined with old, framed photographs. Each one was coated in a thin layer of dust, their sepia-toned images frozen in time. They depicted people dressed in old-fashioned clothing, their expressions vacant, their eyes staring blankly forward. The frames were ornate, their intricate designs tarnished but still elegant. I traced my fingers over the glass of one photo, feeling the cold press of time beneath my touch. The people in the pictures looked unfamiliar, yet something about them unsettled me. The deeper I went, the more the photos seemed to change. The figures in the images appeared closer to the camera, their faces more distinct, their expressions shifting ever so slightly. A chill ran down my spine as I reached the last frame. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the image, my body rooted in place. The photograph showed me standing in that very hallway, in that exact spot. My clothes, my stance, even the way I held my flashlight, it was all the same. But there was one difference. In the photograph, I wasn't alone. My chest tightened as my eyes darted over the frame, searching for an explanation. A shadowy figure loomed just behind me in the picture, its form indistinct, its face obscured by darkness. The longer I stared, the more it seemed to take shape, as if emerging from the depths of the image itself. My pulse pounded in my ears as I slowly turned, afraid of what I might see. The hallway behind me was empty. The dim light of my flashlight stretched into the darkness, illuminating nothing but dust and decay. I exhaled shakily, forcing myself to look back at the photo, hoping I had imagined it. But the figure was still there. And now, its head was tilted slightly as if it had noticed me. A cold sweat broke out on my skin as I took a step back, my fingers gripping the flashlight tighter. The house was too silent, the kind of silence that felt unnatural, like it was waiting. I had to get out. My body moved before my mind caught up, my feet carrying me back toward the foyer, toward the exit. As I turned the corner, a creak sounded from the hallway I had just left. It was slow, deliberate, like the weight of something shifting. I didn't look back. My only focus was reaching the door, getting outside, leaving this place behind. But as I neared the exit, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The front door was closed. I had left it open. My breath hitched as I reached for the handle, my fingers trembling. It wouldn't budge. The door was stuck, as if something on the other side was holding it shut. My heartbeat thundered as I yanked harder, panic creeping into my chest. The walls around me seemed to close in, the air growing heavier, thicker. A faint whisper brushed against my ear, so close I could feel the breath of it. My entire body went rigid as I turned my head ever so slightly. Nothing. Only the empty house, watching. The photographs in the hallway loomed behind me, their images unchanged except for the last one. The frame was now empty. A shudder rolled through me as I staggered back, my mind screaming at me to move. The air around me felt charged, as if something unseen was closing in. My flashlight flickered once, then went out completely, plunging me into darkness. A single sound broke the silence, a soft, dragging step, impossibly close. I bolted. My hands fumbled along the walls as I stumbled through the dark, trying to find another way out. My breathing was ragged, my heart hammering against my ribs. I turned blindly into a room, slamming the door behind me, pressing my back against it. The darkness was suffocating, wrapping around me like a shroud. My pulse roared in my ears as I forced my breathing to slow, to listen. Silence. But I wasn't fooled. I knew something was still there, watching, waiting. I pressed my forehead against the door, trying to steady myself. Then, a whisper, low and rasping, slithered through the darkness. Turn around. Every nerve in my body screamed against it, but my body disobeyed. My breath caught as I slowly turned my head, the darkness stretching before me. My flashlight flickered back to life for just a second. A reflection. The glass of an old, dust-covered mirror caught the dim light, revealing the room's interior. I saw myself first, my wide, terrified eyes, my trembling hands, but I wasn't alone. Behind me, a figure stood motionless, its features obscured, its presence undeniable, and as my breath hitched in my throat, it lifted its hand, reaching for me. I didn't think. I threw myself forward, crashing through the door, stumbling back into the hallway. The photographs were gone now, the walls bare, as if the house had swallowed them whole. My only thought was escape. Somehow I found my way back to the side door. This time it opened. I stumbled outside, gasping in the cool night air, my body trembling violently. The mansion loomed behind me, its windows dark, its secrets buried within its walls. Story 2. The hospital loomed over the empty street, its windows shattered and dark. The entrance doors hung open, revealing a dim hallway stretching into shadow. The air smelled of mildew and decay, a lingering reminder of years left untouched. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing through the silence. Faded signs hung from the ceiling, their lettering barely legible. Old gurneys lined the walls, their wheels rusted, their cushions torn. The paint on the walls had peeled away in long strips, exposing bare concrete beneath. The deeper I moved into the hospital, the colder the air became. The overhead lights were long dead, leaving only the faint glow of the moon through broken windows. A distant dripping sound echoed down the hallway, steady and rhythmic. The silence pressed in around me, amplifying the sound of my own breathing. Something about this place felt different, as if I wasn't truly alone. I moved past empty patient rooms, each one identical in its abandonment. Beds stood untouched, their sheets yellowed and stiff with time. Medical charts littered the floors, their pages curled at the edges. A wheelchair sat in the middle of the hallway, facing a direction it shouldn't have been. Further down the corridor, I saw a doorway slightly ajar. Faint light flickered from within, casting long shadows across the floor. My pulse quickened as I pushed the door open, revealing an operating room. The overhead surgical lights were on, buzzing faintly, their glow casting everything in a sickly hue. The room was eerily pristine compared to the decay outside. The operating table stood in the center, its surface covered in a thin sheet. A tray of surgical tools lay beside it, their metallic edges gleaming under the harsh light. The smell of antiseptic hung in the air, fresh and unmistakable. I took a slow step forward, and that's when I saw the blood. A dark, wet pool spread across the floor, glistening under the lights. It wasn't old, dried into the cracks of the tiles like the other stains I had passed. This was fresh, its sharp scent filling the air, making my stomach tighten. The instruments on the tray were coated in red, as if they had been used only moments ago. A scalpel lay at the edge, a single drop of blood trailing from its tip. My breath hitched as I scanned the room, my skin prickling with the realization that someone had been here, maybe still was. The door creaked behind me, and I spun, heart hammering against my ribs. The hallway was empty, its darkness stretching endlessly in both directions. I forced myself to step forward, scanning every shadow for movement. The hospital had been abandoned for years, yet something was still happening here. A soft sound came from somewhere beyond the room, like a footstep skimming against tile. I turned toward the noise, my pulse hammering in my ears. The silence stretched for what felt like forever before another noise followed, a slow, deliberate creak of metal shifting. I wasn't alone. I backed away from the table, careful not to step in the blood. My eyes darted toward the cabinets lining the wall, searching for a place to hide. The air had shifted, heavy with something unseen pressing in around me. The flickering light above me buzzed louder, filling the silence with an electric hum. A shadow passed just outside the doorway, quick and fleeting. My breath caught as I pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding so hard it ached. I dared not move, straining to hear past the static in my head. The air smelled sharper now, a mix of antiseptic and something metallic. Another sound came, a soft tap, tap, tap against the tile. Slow, deliberate, like someone taking measured steps. The shadow moved again, pausing just outside the room. I felt its presence before I even saw it, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me. The lights above flickered violently, casting the room into stuttering moments of brightness and dark. My fingers curled into fists as I forced myself to breathe. The shadow shifted once more, its form bleeding into the dimness. It was waiting. A metallic clang shattered the silence, sending my pulse into a frenzy. Something had fallen in the hall, breaking the stillness like a gunshot. I took the moment to move, darting toward the far side of the room, pressing myself against the cold tile wall. My breath came in short, uneven gasps. The door creaked open slowly, the darkness of the hallway bleeding into the sterile glow of the operating room. My skin crawled as I caught the barest glimpse of something standing there, tall, unmoving, watching. The light flickered again, and when it steadied, the figure was gone. The scent of antiseptic grew stronger, mixing with the thick scent of blood. My stomach twisted as I looked back at the operating table. The sheet that had been draped over it was now pulled back slightly. The blood on the instruments looked fresher, as if something had just been done. I had to leave. Every instinct screamed at me to get out before whatever had been watching decided to make itself known. I stepped carefully, keeping my eyes on the doorway as I edged toward the exit. My fingers brushed against the handle just as the lights cut out completely. The room plunged into darkness, the silence swallowing everything. I felt something shift behind me, a presence so near I could almost feel its breath against my skin. My throat tightened as my fingers fumbled with the door handle. The cold metal twisted beneath my grip, but it wouldn't budge. A whisper brushed against my ear, faint yet unmistakable. It sent a shiver down my spine, my body locked in place. The sound wasn't words, but something close, something just beyond understanding. My breath hitched as a slow, cold touch trailed down my arm. The lights burst back on and I stumbled forward, the door swinging open at the last second. I didn't look back. My footsteps pounded against the floor as I tore down the hallway, past empty rooms and broken gurneys. The air felt thick, as if the walls themselves were closing in. The hospital seemed endless, the halls twisting in unfamiliar directions. Doors that had once been open were now closed, their locks rusted shut. My lungs burned as I pushed forward, desperate to find the exit. The whispering had stopped, but the weight of something unseen still lingered. Story 3. The school loomed in the moonlight, its windows dark and empty, like hollow eyes staring back at me. Vines crawled up the brick walls, reclaiming the forgotten structure, while the rusted gate stood slightly ajar. I stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of dust, mildew, and something faintly rotten. My footsteps echoed in the vast silence, swallowed by the abandoned halls. Lockers lined both sides of the hallway, their doors dented and scratched, some hanging open as if their contents had been ripped away in a hurry. Faded posters curled at the edges, their messages of school spirit long forgotten. The floor was littered with old papers, some so brittle they crumbled under my shoes. As I moved forward, the unsettling silence stretched, making the space feel unnervingly hollow. Then, I heard it, a whisper, soft and barely audible, drifting from one of the nearby classrooms. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as the sound curled through the air. The voice was distant yet unmistakably real, its hushed tone sending a shiver through my spine. It called my name. I turned toward the nearest classroom, my pulse quickening as I stepped inside. The desks were still arranged in neat rows, their surfaces coated in thick dust. A single chair sat slightly askew, as if someone had left in the middle of a lesson. The chalkboard at the front was blank, except for a few faint smudges, the remnants of a lesson long since forgotten. Another whisper came, this time from the hallway, soft and insistent. My skin prickled as I turned, scanning the darkness beyond the open doorway. I took a hesitant step back into the corridor, my heart pounding in my ears. The whisper came again, closer now, weaving through the stale air like a secret carried by the wind. I followed the sound, my feet moving cautiously across the dusty tiles. The hallway seemed longer than before, stretching endlessly into the darkness. Each door I passed stood open, revealing empty classrooms frozen in time. The whispers continued, shifting from one side of the hall to the other, always just out of reach. I reached a stairwell, the old metal railing cold beneath my fingers as I descended. The air grew heavier, thick with an almost tangible presence, pressing in from all sides. The whispers grew clearer, each voice blending together in an eerie chorus. My name drifted from the shadows, spoken in tones both familiar and foreign. At the bottom of the stairs, the hallway was darker, the windows here covered in grime that blocked out the moonlight. The walls were lined with framed photographs, their glass cracked and fogged with age. I stopped to examine one, my fingers brushing the dusty surface. The students in the picture stood stiffly in their uniforms, their expressions frozen in time. But something was wrong. My chest tightened as I leaned closer. The faces in the photograph had changed. The features were blurred, shifting, as if they were watching me. My reflection stared back at me from the cracked glass, and just behind me, a shadow moved. I spun around, my breath catching as the hallway remained empty. My pulse hammered as I stepped back, my own fear pressing against my ribs. The whispers had stopped. The silence was worse. It was thick, suffocating, like the school itself was holding its breath. Then, the door at the end of the hallway creaked open. A chill swept through the corridor, carrying the scent of damp wood and decay. The room beyond was dark, the shadows impossibly deep. I felt an overwhelming urge to turn back, to leave and never return. But something in that darkness was waiting. I stepped forward, my body tense, every instinct screaming at me to run. The room inside was small, lined with old filing cabinets and forgotten bookshelves. A single desk sat in the center, a chair tucked neatly beneath it. On the surface, an old notebook lay open, its pages yellowed and brittle. I reached for it, my fingers trembling as I lifted the cover. The handwriting was uneven, written in hurried strokes, the ink faded with time. My name appeared on the first line, scrawled over and over as if the writer had been obsessed. The rest of the page was filled with words I didn't understand, phrases that sent ice through my veins. Footsteps echoed behind me, slow and deliberate, breaking the thick silence. My breath hitched as I turned, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The hallway outside was empty, but I knew I was no longer alone. Something unseen lingered just beyond the doorway, watching, waiting. A whisper caressed my ear, impossibly close. My name, spoken in a voice that sent every nerve in my body on edge. I staggered back, my heartbeat a wild drum in my chest. The temperature in the room plummeted, my breath visible in the cold air. The notebook's pages fluttered, though no wind moved through the space. I grabbed the book and turned, bolting from the room and back into the hallway. The whispers returned, growing louder, their voices overlapping in a dissonant hum. The school no longer felt empty. The walls pulsed with an unseen presence, something restless, something hungry. I ran up the stairs, my legs burning, the air thick with the weight of unseen eyes. The shadows stretched unnaturally, reaching for me as I passed. The whispering followed, growing desperate, pleading, angry. My own name repeated over and over, filling every corner of the building. Bursting through the front doors, I stumbled into the cold night air, gasping for breath. The silence outside was deafening, the contrast making my ears ring. The whispers had stopped the moment I crossed the threshold, cut off as if they had never existed. But I knew they had. I looked back at the school, its windows dark and empty once more. The notebook in my hands felt heavier than it should have, its pages whispering against each other as I held it close. My name was inside, written by an unknown hand, calling me back to a past I didn't remember. Story 4. The firehouse stood abandoned at the edge of town, its brick exterior weathered by years of neglect. The large garage doors were rusted shut, and the windows on the upper floors were either broken or covered in grime. Weeds grew through the cracks in the pavement, wrapping around the base of the building like nature's slow reclaiming. Despite its emptiness, something about it felt strangely preserved. I pushed open the front door, its hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the air was thick with dust, carrying the scent of damp wood and something faintly metallic. Rows of old lockers lined the walls, some of them left open, revealing empty shelves and forgotten equipment. The remnants of a life once bustling with urgency and alarm now sat in eerie stillness. Stepping further in, I found a row of old chairs and a wooden desk covered in dust. Faded notices and shift schedules still clung to the walls, their ink barely legible. A fireman's coat hung on a hook by the door, stiff with age, its once bright yellow now dulled. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint creaking of the floor beneath my weight. Then I saw a cup of coffee sitting on the desk, half filled, with tendrils of steam curling into the air. My breath caught as I stared at it, my mind struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. Everything else in the firehouse was coated in dust, untouched for years, yet this cup was fresh, warm. It was impossible. I hesitated before stepping closer, my pulse quickening. The ceramic mug was unremarkable, plain white with a small chip along the rim. The dark liquid inside was still rippling slightly, as if it had just been placed there. I reached out and hovered my hand over the steam, feeling the warmth radiating from it. Someone had been here recently. A noise echoed from deeper within the firehouse, a faint shuffling sound, followed by the creak of something heavy shifting. I froze, my heart pounding against my ribs. The air suddenly felt heavier, the quiet more oppressive. I wasn't alone. Swallowing hard, I turned toward the source of the sound. The hallway leading to the back of the firehouse was darker, the light filtering through the broken windows, barely reaching it. I took a cautious step forward, straining to listen. The sound had stopped, but the feeling of being watched settled deep in my gut. I moved carefully, my footsteps muffled by dust and debris. The hallway was lined with doors leading to old offices and storage rooms, some of them slightly ajar. A faded calendar on the wall was still turned to a month from over a decade ago. It was as if time had stopped, yet that coffee suggested otherwise. Reaching the end of the hall, I found an open door leading into what must have been the bunk room. Rows of metal-framed beds stood in neat lines, their mattresses bare and yellowed with age. Some still had sheets, stiff and brittle from years of exposure. A single locker stood open, a pair of boots rested neatly inside, as if waiting for someone to step into them. A sudden sharp click echoed behind me, like the sound of a switch being flipped. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. The lights above flickered weakly before humming to life, casting a dim yellow glow over the room. My skin crawled. There was no power in this building, there couldn't be. My eyes darted to the door, but it remained open, showing the same dark hallway beyond. The air felt charged. Electric was something I couldn't name. My mind screamed at me to leave, but my legs refused to move. Then, from the hall, a voice whispered my name. The sound was low, barely more than a breath, but it sent ice through my veins. I turned my head slowly, my body rigid with fear. The hallway was empty, the flickering light barely illuminating the cracked tile floor. Yet I could feel it, that heavy presence pressing in, unseen but undeniable. I forced my feet to move, stepping back into the hall, my every instinct screaming at me to run. My eyes swept the corridor, searching for movement, but there was nothing. The firehouse remained as empty as when I had first entered. Yet the cup of coffee, the shifting sounds, the whispered name, all of it told me otherwise. I moved quickly now, retracing my steps toward the front of the building. My pulse thundered in my ears, my breathing shallow. As I reached the main room, my eyes flicked to the desk. The coffee cup was gone. The desk was just as dusty as before, undisturbed, as if nothing had ever been there. I stared at the empty space, my mind struggling to grasp what I was seeing. The warmth, the steam, the rippling liquid, it had been real. I knew it had, but now there was nothing. A chill swept through the room, and I felt it again, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. I turned sharply, scanning the corners of the firehouse, but I saw no one. My breath came in shaky gasps as I backed toward the door, my hands trembling. Then, just before I reached the exit, the old radio on the wall crackled to life. The static hissed through the silence before a faint voice broke through. It was garbled, distant, but I recognized the tone. It was an emergency call. Engine 17, respond, structure fire, corner of. The voice faded in and out, the words barely discernible. My stomach clenched as I realized what I was hearing. This firehouse had been closed for over a decade. There was no Engine 17. The radio continued its distorted transmission before cutting off abruptly, leaving only static. I couldn't take it anymore. I shoved the door open and stumbled outside, gulping in the fresh air. The sky had darkened, the wind picking up as I turned to look back at the firehouse. Through the cracked window, I thought I saw movement, a shadow shifting behind the glass. But when I blinked, it was gone. The firehouse stood just as it had when I arrived, silent, abandoned, untouched. Yet I knew the truth. Something was still inside, and whoever or whatever it was, they had never truly left. Story 5. The amusement park had been abandoned for decades, left to decay beneath creeping vines and layers of rust. Faded banners still hung from broken poles, their once bright colors dulled by time. The air smelled of damp wood, metal, and the faintest trace of something sweet, like old popcorn left to rot. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the distant creak of a sign swaying in the breeze. I stepped over cracked pavement, my boots kicking up dust as I wandered deeper. The skeletal remains of a Ferris wheel loomed ahead, its cabin swaying slightly as if stirred by unseen hands. A carousel stood motionless nearby, its horses frozen in mid-gallop, their eyes chipped and hollow. The park felt frozen in time, as if waiting for someone to bring it back to life. Then I saw the roller coaster. Its towering frame was rusted through, the tracks coated in years of neglect. Vines wove between the beams, nature reclaiming what had been left behind. The cars were still on the tracks, eerily intact, as if waiting for riders who would never return. As I moved closer, something caught my eye. The tracks leading into the ride were clean, untouched by rust, with fresh tire marks cutting through the grime. My heart pounded as I crouched down, running my fingers along the indentations. Someone had been here recently. Someone had used it. The thought sent a chill through me. Who would come here, to a place forgotten by time? I glanced around, suddenly feeling exposed beneath the watchful ruins of the park. The shadows between the rides seemed darker, deeper, as if something lurked just beyond sight. I followed the tracks up to the loading platform, the wooden planks groaning beneath my weight. The control panel was still there, covered in dust, but the buttons looked clean, as if they had been used. The lever for the ride's release stood slightly forward, not locked in its usual position. The coaster cars sat motionless on the track, their seats covered in peeling vinyl. I reached out and touched the nearest one, half expecting it to be cold and brittle. Instead, it felt smooth, almost warm, as if someone had just been sitting there. A low groan echoed through the empty park, the sound vibrating through the rusted beams. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The coaster tracks rattled slightly, as though something had shifted, though there was no wind. The silence that followed was deafening. I turned to leave, but something stopped me. A single footprint, damp and fresh, leading toward the tracks. My pulse quickened as I stared at it. The ground was dry, untouched by rain, yet this print stood out as if someone had stepped there only moments ago. A sudden noise behind me made me whirl around. The control panel flickered to life, its dim lights blinking weakly. The lever that had been slightly forward now moved on its own, sliding fully into position. A low hum filled the air, the sound of ancient machinery coming to life. The roller coaster creaked, the cars shifting as if something had just climbed in. My stomach twisted as the first car lurched forward, slowly rolling along the track. There was no one inside, yet the ride moved as if carrying unseen passengers. I took a step back, my body screaming at me to run. The car gained speed, rattling up the first incline, the old chain lift clanking in protest. The sound echoed through the park, breaking the heavy silence. I watched, frozen, as the car reached the peak and hesitated. Then it plunged forward. The rush of air hit me as it roared past, the sound too real, too alive. My eyes locked onto the empty seats, yet for a split second, I saw something else. Shadows flickered within the car, shapes that shouldn't be there. A blur of figures, hands gripping the safety bars, heads thrown back and silent screams. The coaster twisted through the decayed tracks, moving faster than it should have. The rusted beams shuddered under the force, but they held, as if obeying something unseen. My breath came in short gasps as I watched it race toward the final turn. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the ride came to a stop. The car rolled into the loading platform, slowing to a smooth halt. The air was thick with silence, heavy and expectant. My chest tightened as I stared at the empty seats. The safety bars lifted on their own, as if releasing passengers that weren't there. A gust of wind rushed past me, carrying a whisper I couldn't quite understand. The air smelled of something old, something faded like perfume lingering long after its wearer had vanished. I backed away, my legs shaking. The control panel went dark, they hummed fading into nothingness. The tire tracks, fresh just moments ago, were now gone, as if they had never existed. The roller coaster sat still once more, frozen in its rusted decay. I turned and ran, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. The park felt different now, its silence heavier, its shadows deeper. Every rustling leaf, every distant creak sent jolts of fear through me. The entrance loomed ahead, and I didn't stop until I was back outside the gates. The moment I crossed the threshold, the air changed. The oppressive weight lifted, and the world around me seemed normal again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me, that I had disturbed something that wasn't meant to be seen. I looked back one last time. The Ferris wheel stood still, the carousel frozen in place. The roller coaster remained rusted and broken, just as it had been before. But as I turned away, I could swear I heard the faintest clatter of tracks behind me, as if the ride had just begun again. Story 6. The abandoned church stood at the edge of town, its stone walls cracked and worn from years of neglect. Ivy crawled up the sides, winding around shattered stained glass windows that no longer held their colorful beauty. The heavy wooden doors were slightly ajar, as if waiting for someone to step inside. The air around it felt still, unnaturally quiet, as though even the wind hesitated to pass through. Inside, the scent of dust and aged wood filled my lungs. The pews were coated in a thick layer of dust, some of them collapsed under the weight of time. The altar stood intact, its once polished surface now dull and lifeless. Shafts of light filtered in through broken windows, casting eerie patterns on the cracked stone floor. I walked slowly down the center aisle, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. The silence was oppressive, pressing against my ears, as though the church itself was listening. A few hymn books remained scattered across the pews, their covers warped with age. I reached out to touch one, feeling the rough, brittle pages beneath my fingertips. A faint creaking noise made me pause. It came from the far end of the church, near a row of pews untouched by collapse. My breath hitched as I stepped closer, my eyes scanning the dimly lit space. Sitting neatly on one of the pews was a folded prayer book, its black leather cover worn but intact. I picked it up carefully, the leather cold beneath my hands. The pages inside were yellowed, some curling at the edges, but one had been deliberately marked. A small slip of paper peeked out from the middle, its surface creased from years of being pressed between the pages. I pulled it free and read the date scrawled in neat handwriting, today's date. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I hadn't told anyone I was coming here, hadn't planned this visit in advance. The ink looked faded, but not old enough to belong to someone long gone. I turned the page it had marked, expecting to see a familiar passage, but the words were blurred, as the water had smeared the ink. I ran my fingers over the page, feeling the slight indentation of writing beneath my touch. It wasn't just water damage, the words had been written over in something darker, something that made the paper feel heavier. The silence around me deepened, as if the church itself was holding its breath. I looked around, suddenly feeling watched. The broken windows allowed glimpses of the outside world, but the light felt weaker, as if struggling to reach inside. The air had grown colder, raising goosebumps along my arms. The weight of the book in my hands felt wrong, like it didn't belong here, or worse, like it did, and so did I. A rustling noise came from behind the altar. My breath caught, my grip tightening on the book. It sounded like fabric brushing against wood, slow and deliberate. I forced myself to turn, scanning the shadows that pooled in the corners of the church. The pulpit stood empty, but the uneasy feeling in my chest didn't fade. The air felt thick, heavy with something I couldn't name. My pulse hammered in my ears as I took a hesitant step back. The floorboards beneath me groaned, the sound stretching through the silence. Something shifted in the pews behind me, the sound barely more than a whisper. I turned sharply, but nothing had moved. The pews remained as they were aged, broken, and abandoned. But the prayer book in my hands felt warmer now, as if something had changed within its pages. I hesitated, then slowly opened it again. The marked page was no longer smeared. The words were clear now, written in dark ink that looked fresh. My stomach twisted as I read the passage, my fingers gripping the edges of the book. It spoke of a visitor, one who arrived in the dead of silence, drawn by something unseen. The final line sent a chill through me, and they shall not leave alone. The rustling sound returned, closer this time. I could feel it before I heard it, the presence of something just beyond my sight. The cold pressed in around me, wrapping around my limbs like unseen fingers. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move, to step away from the pews and toward the exit. The church felt larger now, the aisle stretching endlessly before me. My legs felt heavy as I walked, as though the air itself resisted my movement. Each step echoed louder than the last, filling the vast emptiness with unnatural sound. The prayer book remained in my grip, as if glued to my fingers. A shadow flickered at the edge of my vision. My breath hitched, but I didn't turn. The doors loomed ahead, slightly open, but they looked farther than before. I quickened my pace, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. The rustling noise followed, persistent and steady. The moment I reached the threshold, the air shifted. The cold vanished in an instant, replaced by the warm, stagnant heat of the outside world. I stumbled forward, nearly dropping the book as I gasped for breath. The silence behind me felt deafening, like the church itself had swallowed whatever had been inside. I turned slowly, expecting to see nothing but decay and emptiness. The pews were as they had been, dusty, untouched, abandoned. The altar stood motionless, the shadows undisturbed. But the prayer book in my hands was no longer old. The cover was smooth, the leather new, the pages crisp beneath my fingers. My stomach twisted as I realized what had changed. The marked page was gone, replaced by another slip of paper tucked neatly into the center. My hands trembled as I pulled it free, my breath catching as I read the fresh ink scrawled across it. It was my name. Story 7. The factory stood on the outskirts of town, its rusted frame barely holding together after years of abandonment. Broken windows lined the upper floors, jagged glass reflecting the last bit of daylight. A heavy metal door, slightly ajar, creaked as I pushed it open, revealing the darkened interior. The scent of old oil and damp concrete filled my lungs as I stepped inside. The silence was thick, the kind that made my own breathing sound too loud. Dust coated every surface, undisturbed except for the faint trails of rodents that had long claimed this place. I moved cautiously, my footsteps echoing against the high ceilings and empty workstations. The deeper I went, the more the air felt heavy, almost as if the factory itself was watching me. Rows of rusted machinery stood like forgotten sentinels, their once powerful forms now decayed. Chains hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly even though there was no breeze. My flashlight beam cut through the dimness, revealing scattered tools and old workbenches covered in dust. Something about the space felt off, but I pushed the feeling aside and kept moving. I reached a wide doorway that led into one of the main workrooms. The moment I stepped inside, the overhead lights flickered to life, casting harsh, flickering beams across the space. My breath caught in my throat as I froze, gripping my flashlight tightly. There was no power in the building, there shouldn't have been any working lights. The air grew colder, and a faint whisper drifted from the far end of the room. It was distant at first, barely more than a breath against the silence. Then, clear as day, a voice echoed through the space, low and strained. "Leave now." The words sent a sharp chill down my spine, and I turned quickly, scanning the room for any sign of movement. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, twisting with each flicker of the overhead lights. My gut clenched as I took a slow step backward, my pulse hammering in my ears. The factory had been abandoned for years, there was no way someone was still here. And yet, the voice had been unmistakably real, not some trick of my imagination. I swallowed hard and forced myself to move toward the doorway, my instincts screaming at me to leave. The lights buzzed, dimming for a moment before surging back to life. As they did, something shifted in the far corner of the room, just out of the reach of my flashlight. A shadow detached itself from the darkness, a shape barely visible in the unsteady light. I stopped in my tracks, my fingers tightening around the flashlight as I aimed it toward the movement. The beam landed on an empty wall, the peeling paint revealing the concrete beneath. But I knew what I had seen, something had been there, just for a moment. The whisper returned, more urgent this time, but still carrying that same warning. "Leave." My breathing quickened as I turned sharply, heading back toward the main floor. My footsteps echoed louder than before, as if the factory itself was amplifying the sound. The lights overhead flickered in unison with my movement, casting shifting shadows that made the walls feel like they were closing in. The cold sensation at my back intensified, making the hairs on my neck stand on end. Just as I reached the entrance hall, a metallic clang rang out behind me, sharp and sudden. I spun around, my flashlight shaking slightly as I pointed it toward the source of the sound. A heavy wrench lay on the floor near one of the workbenches, as if it had just been knocked over. But there was no one there, nothing had moved except for the wrench itself. Panic clawed at my chest as I turned toward the exit, no longer caring about keeping calm. I needed to get out of there before whatever was in that factory decided I had overstayed my welcome. My footsteps were quick and uneven as I crossed the dusty floor, my mind racing with possibilities. The voice, the flickering lights, the wrench, it was all leading to one conclusion. Something was still here. As I reached the doorway, the lights in the entire factory shut off at once, plunging the space into darkness. My flashlight flickered for a moment, then steadied, its weak beam barely cutting through the oppressive black. The whisper returned, now so close it felt as though it was right beside my ear. Too late. A cold breath brushed against my neck, and I stumbled forward, nearly tripping over the threshold. I didn't dare look back as I burst through the exit, gasping as the night air hit my face. The metal door slammed shut behind me with a force that sent vibrations through the ground. My heart pounded as I staggered away, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The factory stood in eerie silence once more, its windows dark and lifeless. The wind had picked up slightly, rustling the overgrown grass and broken debris scattered around the lot. But inside, beyond that door, I could still feel it, that lingering presence, watching, waiting. I had gotten out, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. I turned one last time, my breath coming in short gasps as I watched the factory from a distance. The building loomed against the night sky, its decayed structure even more sinister in the darkness. Just as I was about to leave, a single light flickered to life in one of the upper windows. It stayed on for a few seconds, then blinked out again, leaving nothing but the empty black void. I didn't wait any longer. I hurried away, my legs shaking with every step, my mind screaming at me never to return. Whatever was in that factory had given me a warning, and I had no intention of finding out what would have happened if I had stayed. The whispers, the shifting shadows, the cold breath on my neck, it had all been real. Even now I can still hear that voice in my head, repeating the same chilling words. Leave now. But I know the truth. I didn't leave in time, and something, whatever it was, made sure I would never forget. Story 8. The hospital stood at the edge of town, abandoned for decades, its windows shattered and walls stained with time. Vines curled through the cracks in the brick, and rust streaked the metal doors. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay, yet something about the place pulled me forward. I had always been fascinated by forgotten places, but this one felt different. Stepping inside, I was met with silence, save for the occasional creak of the building settling. The walls were peeling, the paint curling like old parchment. Rusted gurneys and overturned wheelchairs littered the halls, their wheels frozen in place by years of dust. Faint remnants of old hospital signs hung at odd angles, their letters barely legible. I walked carefully, my footsteps echoing against the hollow walls. Patient rooms stretched in both directions, each one dark and filled with remnants of a past long gone. Faded charts lay scattered across the floor, their ink smudged and unreadable. The silence deepened, pressing against me as if the building itself was holding its breath. As I moved further in, I came across what had once been a ward filled with beds. Rows of rusted frames lined the room, their mattresses eaten away by time. Cobwebs stretched between them, undisturbed, save for the occasional scurry of something unseen. Dust coated everything in thick layers, the air stagnant and undisturbed. I was about to turn back when I noticed one bed that stood out from the rest. Unlike the others, its sheets weren't covered in dust. They were crisp, neatly turned down as though someone had been lying there recently. The contrast was unsettling, as if time had ignored this single bed while erasing everything else. A chill ran down my spine as I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my ears. The sheets weren't just clean, they smelled faintly of something floral, something recent. My fingers trembled as I reached out, barely brushing the fabric. It was soft, untouched by decay, impossibly fresh in this place of rot and ruin. I turned, scanning the room, my breath shallow and uneven. There were no footprints in the dust, no signs of movement. Yet the feeling of being watched crept over me, tightening around my chest like an unseen hand. The silence had changed, shifting into something heavier, something expectant. A sudden creak echoed from the hallway, making me jerk around. My pulse thundered as I stared into the darkness, waiting for another sound. Nothing moved, yet the air felt charged, like a storm waiting to break. I took a slow step backward, my gaze flickering between the empty beds and the yawning entrance of the hall. Then, from the far corner of the ward, I heard the faintest rustle. It was the sound of fabric moving, something shifting beneath the covers. My body locked up, every muscle screaming at me to run. but I couldn't. My eyes were fixed on the bed, on the barely perceptible rise and fall beneath the sheets. Someone was lying there. A breath caught in my throat, cold and sharp as ice. The sheet began to slide back slowly, as if unseen fingers were peeling it away inch by inch. My stomach knotted, dread flooding through me in waves. The moment the fabric slipped past where a face should have been, I bolted. I didn't look back as I ran down the hall, my footsteps pounding against the broken tiles. The corridors twisted and stretched, their familiar layout suddenly foreign. Doors that had been open were now shut, their handles rusted over as though they had never been touched. The air grew thick, suffocating, pressing in from all sides. I reached the entrance, my hands slamming against the rusted door. It groaned, refusing to budge, as if the building itself had no intention of letting me leave. Panic clawed at my chest, my breath shallow and ragged. I turned my back to the door, scanning the darkened hall for movement. Something was there. A figure stood just beyond the rows of beds, its form barely visible in the dim light. It didn't move, didn't breathe, just watched. The air between us crackled, heavy with something unseen yet unmistakable. My fingers dug into the cold metal of the door handle, desperate for escape. A whisper slid through the silence, a voice that didn't belong to anything living. The figure shifted, a slow, deliberate movement that sent ice through my veins. My grip tightened, and with one final desperate pull, the door gave way. I stumbled outside, gasping as the night air hit my skin. The hospital loomed behind me, its empty windows staring like hollow eyes. The silence stretched, unbroken, as if nothing had happened. Yet I knew better. I could still feel it, the weight of something unseen, watching from the darkened halls. I backed away, my heart hammering, refusing to turn my back until I was far beyond its reach. As I reached my car, I hesitated, my hands shaking as I gripped the door. The urge to look back gnawed at me, but I forced myself to resist. Some things weren't meant to be seen twice. Some places, once entered, never truly let you go. Story 9. The theater stood forgotten at the edge of town, its once grand facade now cracked and crumbling. The marquee above the entrance had long since lost its letters, leaving only rusted metal hanging in place. The double doors were shut, their glass panels covered in grime, yet something about the place called to me. Ignoring the uneasy feeling in my chest, I stepped forward and pushed the door open. Inside, dust coated everything, and the stale scent of mildew clung to the air. Faded posters lined the walls, their edges curling, the faces of long-forgotten actors staring blankly into the void. The carpet beneath my feet was brittle, each step sending up tiny clouds of dust. The grand chandelier above hung precariously, swaying slightly despite the stillness of the air. My eyes landed on the ticket booth standing surprisingly intact near the entrance. Its glass window was smeared with years of neglect, but the machine inside looked untouched, as if it had been waiting. The counter was covered in dust, yet there was no sign of damage, no broken glass or signs of intrusion. I hesitated before stepping closer, curiosity outweighing the lingering unease. The machine suddenly whirred to life, its mechanical clicking echoing through the empty theater. The sound sent a jolt through me, my breath catching in my throat. There was no electricity, no reason for it to be functioning. And yet, before I could react, a small slip of paper emerged from the slot. I reached out with trembling fingers, my pulse hammering as I lifted the ticket. My name was printed clearly on the surface, followed by a time stamp this exact moment. A shiver crawled down my spine as I stared at the impossible ticket. It was fresh, the ink still drying, as if the machine had been expecting me. The lights in the hallway flickered, casting eerie shadows along the walls. I turned sharply, expecting movement, but the theater remained empty. My fingers tightened around the ticket, the paper warm against my skin. Something was wrong here, something unseen lingering just beyond my understanding. A faint creak echoed from deeper inside the building, the sound of a door opening. My body stiffened, my ears straining to locate its source. The theater had been abandoned for decades. There shouldn't have been anyone else here. And yet, the unmistakable feeling of being watched crept over me, thick and suffocating. Against my better judgment, I took a slow step forward, my heartbeat roaring in my ears. The main theater doors stood slightly ajar now, though I was certain they had been closed moments ago. A faint light flickered from within, the glow weak and uneven. It beckoned me forward, an unspoken invitation I couldn't ignore. The heavy doors groaned as I pushed them open, revealing the vast auditorium beyond. Rows of velvet-covered seats stretched before me, their deep red fabric faded to a dull maroon. The massive screen at the front stood blank, the projector above silent and still. Yet the unsettling sensation of an audience lingered, an invisible presence filling the space. A sharp click echoed from the projection booth above, followed by the faint hum of machinery. My breath hitched as the screen flickered to life, the grainy image slowly coming into focus. The footage showed the very ticket booth I had just been standing at, the camera angle positioned as if watching from above. A cold chill crept up my spine as I saw myself on the screen. The recorded version of me stood in the exact same spot, mirroring my every move. I watched frozen, as my filmed self hesitated before reaching for the ticket. The moment my fingers touched the slip of paper, the screen distorted, the image flickering violently before cutting to black. Silence swallowed the room, thick and unnatural. A low murmur filled the air, a chorus of whispers just beyond my comprehension. My hands clenched into fists as I scanned the darkness, my instincts screaming at me to leave. The feeling of being watched had intensified, pressing against me from all sides. And then, slowly, the screen brightened once more. The image now showed the empty theater, the seats vacant except for one. My stomach twisted as I realized it was me. I was sitting in the front row, staring up at the screen, but I hadn't moved. I turned sharply, my breath catching as I found the front row empty. But on the screen, my reflection remained seated, its head tilting slightly as if aware of my gaze. The lights overhead flickered violently, the whispers swelling into a deafening roar. The walls trembled, dust cascading from the ceiling in thin, ghostly streams. I stumbled backward, the urge to run overpowering every other thought. But before I could move, my reflection on the screen smiled. The expression wasn't mine, it was something else entirely. A slow, knowing grin that stretched too wide, the eyes dark and hollow. My chest tightened as the screen cut to static, the sound crackling through the theater like a dying breath. And then, the ticket in my hand burned. I gasped, releasing it instinctively, but the paper didn't fall. It clung to my palm, the ink seeping into my skin like spreading veins. Panic surged through me as the theater around me twisted, the walls warping, stretching into impossible angles. The seats rippled like liquid, the air itself bending in unnatural ways. A shadow moved in the aisle, long and impossibly tall. It glided toward me, its form shifting, never fully solid. The whispers converged into a single voice, hollow and amused. "The show must go on," it murmured, the words crawling into my skull like ice. The burning in my hand intensified, the ink now threading through my veins. My vision blurred, the world tilting violently as the shadow loomed closer. I tried to move, to fight, but my limbs refused to obey. The screen flickered one last time, revealing a final message. Welcome to the show. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me was my own face, staring back from the screen. Not my reflection, something else. Something wearing my face, smiling that awful, knowing grin. And then, the lights went out. Story 10. The mansion loomed ahead, its towering frame swallowed by time and neglect. Ivy crawled up the cracked stone walls, weaving through shattered windows like grasping fingers. The iron gates stood slightly ajar, their rusted hinges frozen in place. A heavy silence pressed against the air, thick with the scent of damp wood and decay. Stepping inside, my footsteps echoed against the dust-covered floor. The grand foyer stretched out before me, its once opulent chandelier hanging crooked, crystals missing. Faded paintings lined the walls, their subjects staring blankly with eyes that seemed to follow me. The air was stale, carrying whispers of a past long forgotten. I wandered deeper, my fingers trailing along the peeling wallpaper. Doors stood ajar, revealing glimpses of rooms frozen in time-torn velvet curtains, overturned furniture, shattered mirrors reflecting the gloom. The house felt abandoned yet disturbingly untouched, as if waiting for someone to return. The library was at the end of the hall, its heavy wooden doors slightly open. Stepping inside, I was met with the scent of old paper and dust, thick and almost suffocating. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, their contents untouched but for a single table where a neat stack of journals rested. The leather covers were cracked with age, their spines worn from years of use. I reached for the top journal, its pages brittle beneath my fingers. The handwriting was elegant, looping letters filling each page with careful precision. It spoke of daily life in the mansion, guests who once visited, seasons that passed, and an ever-present feeling of being watched. The words carried a strange weight, as if whoever had written them had always known they would be read. As I flipped through the pages, the entries grew more erratic. Mentions of shadows in the corridors, whispers in the dead of night, and unseen figures standing just beyond candlelight. The last journal in the stack sent a shiver down my spine. Unlike the others, its pages were nearly pristine, as if it had been left for me to find. The final entry stopped me cold. It described a visitor, someone who had entered the mansion, wandered its halls, and found the library. The details were too specific, too precise. My breath caught as I reached the last line. The writer described the visitor's face, their expression of confusion, the way they turned each page with careful hesitation. It described me. I dropped the journal, my pulse hammering. The air in the room felt heavier now, thick with something unseen. My eyes darted around, searching for any sign that I wasn't alone. The bookshelves loomed like silent witnesses, their rows of forgotten knowledge concealing something just beyond sight. A sudden creak broke the silence, the unmistakable sound of a footstep on aging wood. My breath hitched as I turned toward the doorway, expecting to see someone standing there. The hallway was empty, but the feeling of being watched had intensified. It pressed against me, unseen but undeniable. I backed away from the table, my hands shaking. The journals sat undisturbed, but I could no longer shake the feeling that they had been waiting for me. Another creak sounded, this time closer. The air shifted, a barely perceptible change, as if something had moved just out of sight. I forced myself toward the door, my heart beat loud in my ears. The hallway stretched before me, darker than before, the shadows thick and unmoving. I needed to leave. The weight of the journal's words still clung to me, wrapping around my thoughts like a vice. I wasn't meant to be here. As I stepped into the hallway, the temperature dropped, cold air curling around my skin. My breath came in quick bursts, visible in the dim light filtering through the broken windows. The house had changed. The walls seemed taller, the doors unfamiliar. The way back no longer felt clear. I moved quickly, forcing myself forward despite the overwhelming sensation that I was being followed. Every creak of the floorboards sent a fresh jolt of fear through me. The mansion had swallowed the outside world, trapping me within its decaying grip. I needed to find the exit before it was too late. A whisper brushed against my ear, so close that I could feel the breath behind it. My name, drawn out, slow, unmistakable. My body seized with terror, my legs locking in place. The silence that followed was worse. It stretched, expectant, waiting for me to react. I broke into a run, pushing through the darkness, my only goal to escape. The house seemed endless, its halls twisting into unfamiliar paths. My own footprints in the dust vanished behind me, erased as if I had never been there. My breathing grew ragged, panic clawing at my chest. Then I saw it. The grand foyer, just ahead. Relief flooded me as I sprinted toward the entrance. The doors stood open, the night sky visible beyond them, dark and endless. I didn't slow. I couldn't. Whatever was behind me was too close. Just as I reached the threshold, I felt it. A hand cold and unseen grasping my wrist. I yanked away, stumbling onto the overgrown steps, my heart nearly bursting from my chest. The night air rushed over me, thick and humid, but I didn't stop until I reached my car. I didn't look back. I couldn't bear to see what might be standing in the doorway, watching me. The mansion loomed in my rearview mirror as I sped away, its silhouette unchanged, as if nothing had ever stirred within its walls. But I knew better. The journals had known me. The house had expected me. And somewhere, buried in those endless pages, another entry was waiting to be written. Story 11. The old zoo had been abandoned for decades, swallowed by time and nature. Rusted cages stood like skeletal remains, their bars twisted and broken in places. Vines had crawled over the pathways, their roots cracking the concrete beneath my feet. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood, decay, and something else, something I couldn't quite name. I moved carefully through the overgrown paths, my footsteps crunching over leaves and debris. Faded signs still labeled the enclosures, their letters worn away by rain and time. The remnants of once grand habitats loomed around me, their glass shattered, their walls crumbling. I had always been drawn to abandoned places, but there was something different about this one. A strange stillness hung in the air, as if the zoo itself was holding its breath. Birds didn't sing. Insects didn't hum. Even the wind barely stirred through the trees. It was as if the place existed in a bubble of silence, separate from the world beyond its rusting gates. I found myself standing before an enclosure with a rusted sign that read Primate House in flaking letters. The bars were still intact, though twisted at odd angles, as if something had tried to force its way out. The door to the enclosure was locked, the heavy chain looped through the handles rusted with age. I stepped closer, peering through the bars into the dim interior. The air inside was thick with shadows, the light barely reaching beyond the doorway. My breath was slow and measured, my ears straining against the silence, and then I heard it. Breathing. It was deep, slow, and deliberate, coming from somewhere inside the enclosure. My pulse quickened as I stepped back, scanning the space for movement. The sound didn't belong to an animal. It was too steady, too human. A chill crept up my spine as I reached for my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. Dust particles floated in the light, swirling as if disturbed by something unseen. The breathing didn't stop. It remained steady, just beyond where the light could reach. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the flashlight. "Hello?" My voice barely broke the silence, the word swallowed by the heavy air. No response, just the sound of breathing, steady and unshaken. A faint scuffing noise followed, like the shuffle of feet on concrete. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I took another step back. The door was locked. Nothing should be inside, and yet something was. The rational part of me screamed to leave, but something held me there, a morbid curiosity mixed with an unsettling fear. I lifted the flashlight again, aiming it toward the far end of the enclosure. The beam flickered over the walls, revealing claw marks gouged deep into the cement. The scuffing noise came again, closer this time. The breathing remained unchanged, steady and deliberate, as if whatever was inside knew I was listening. My hands were clammy against the flashlight, my breath coming in shallow bursts. And then, the breathing stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, pressing against my ears with an unnatural weight. Every muscle in my body tensed, my instincts screaming at me to run. My feet refused to move, as if I had been rooted to the ground by some unseen force. A single sound shattered the silence, a soft, slow tap against the door from the inside. It was deliberate, controlled, as if testing the barrier between us. The breath I had been holding escaped in a shudder as my fingers fumbled for my pocket knife, the tiny blade feeling useless in my trembling grip. Then another tap, and another, each one precise, like a message in a code I didn't understand. I forced myself to step back, my mind racing with the possibilities of what could be inside. No animal could have survived in there for decades. No person should have been inside at all. The air around me grew heavier, as if the very atmosphere of the zoo had shifted. My pulse hammered as I turned to leave, my instincts finally winning over my curiosity. But just as I moved, the rusted chain on the door rattled. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The chain, corroded and stiff with age, trembled as if something inside had gripped it. The air felt electric, charged with an unseen presence pressing against the other side. I took another step back, my body screaming at me to move faster. The chain jerked again, harder this time, sending a sharp metallic clatter through the air. My feet finally obeyed, and I turned on my heel, moving as quickly as I could without breaking into a full sprint. Behind me, the rattling grew more frantic, followed by a slow, deep exhale. My breath hitched as I reached the overgrown path, my legs carrying me faster than I had thought possible. The trees loomed around me, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers as I pushed forward. I didn't stop until I reached the entrance of the zoo, my chest heaving, my skin slick with sweat. The iron gates stood ajar, rusted and warped by time, but still standing as they had been when I entered. The night had settled around me, the outside world still humming with life beyond the forgotten ruins. I turned one last time, my eyes trailing back to the path I had just escaped. The zoo stood in eerie silence, its empty cages swallowed by the creeping darkness. The wind stirred through the trees now, the illusion of stillness broken. But just as I turned away, a final sound sent a cold shiver through my bones. A sharp, metallic click echoed through the air, the sound of the primate house door unlocking. I didn't wait to see what would follow. I ran until the zoo was nothing but a distant nightmare behind me, swallowed by the past. But even now, when the world is silent, I still hear it. The slow, steady breathing, waiting behind a locked door that should have never been opened. Story 12. The bunker was barely visible beneath a thick layer of moss and fallen leaves. The entrance, a rusted metal door set into the earth, was partially hidden by overgrown roots. I had nearly walked past it, dismissing it as nothing more than a collapsed part of the forest floor. Curiosity tugged at me, urging me to take a closer look. Brushing away the debris, I found a handle, cold and rough beneath my fingers. It resisted at first, stiff from years of neglect, but with a sharp pull, it groaned open. A damp, musty scent wafted up from the darkness below, thick with earth and decay. My flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing a narrow staircase descending into the unknown. The walls were lined with rusted metal, streaked with moisture and time. The air grew colder with each step, wrapping around me like a warning. My breath echoed softly in the confined space, the silence pressing in from all sides. Something about the bunker felt wrong, but I pushed forward. At the bottom of the stairs, a small corridor stretched ahead, disappearing into the darkness. The floor was slick with condensation, the scent of mildew overwhelming. My flashlight flickered for a moment, making my pulse quicken. The bunker had been abandoned for years at least. That's what I had assumed. The first room I entered was small, filled with rusting shelves and scattered papers. The faded maps were pinned to the walls, their edges curling with age. An old desk sat against the far wall, drawers half open as if someone had searched through them in a hurry. Dust clung to everything, undisturbed for what seemed like decades. I moved further in, stepping cautiously over debris. A heavy metal filing cabinet stood against one wall, its drawers locked tight. Nearby, a wooden crate had been pried open, its contents spilling onto the floor. Old photographs lay scattered among the wreckage, their black and white images yellowed with time. Kneeling down, I picked up a few of the photos, brushing off the dust. They depicted people, their faces blurred and indistinct. Some stood outside what looked like this very bunker, their expressions frozen in time. A chill crawled down my spine as I realized these weren't just random explorers, they were standing exactly where I had just been. Flipping through more of the photos, I found one that made my breath catch. It was me. The image was recent, far clearer than the others, showing me standing at the bunker's entrance. My flashlight was raised, my expression cautious, just as I had been moments ago. But that was impossible. My hands trembled as I lowered the photograph, my mind racing. Someone had been here, watching me, documenting my arrival. I glanced around the dim room, every shadow suddenly feeling alive. The thought that I wasn't alone sent a cold shiver through me. The sound echoed from deeper within the bunker, a soft shuffle, barely perceptible. My breath hitched as I turned toward the noise, heart pounding. The darkness beyond my flashlight seemed to stretch endlessly, concealing whatever had made the sound. I wasn't sure if I wanted to know what was there. I took a cautious step back, debating whether to leave. But another sound followed, this time closer, a slow, deliberate scrape against metal. Someone or something was moving in the bunker with me. The air felt heavier, as if the walls were pressing in, urging me to run. I moved toward the exit, trying to keep my steps silent. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to put as much distance between myself and whatever lurked in the depths of the bunker. But just as I reached the stairs, my flashlight flickered again, the beam struggling against the thick darkness. A whisper brushed against the silence, so faint I almost thought I imagined it. My pulse pounded in my ears as I turned back, scanning the hallway behind me. The bunker, once eerily quiet, now felt suffocating, filled with unseen eyes. I had no choice, I had to get out. I took the stairs two at a time, gripping the rusted railing to keep my balance. The open doorway above was a beacon, a promise of escape. But just before I reached it, my flashlight gave one final flicker and died. The darkness swallowed everything, and for a moment, I was completely blind. Panic surged through me as I stumbled forward, my fingers grazing the damp walls for support. A sharp breath sounded behind me, too close, too real. I lunged for the opening, my heart slamming against my ribs. As I pulled myself through the doorway, the air around me seemed to shift, thick with something unseen. The moment I was outside, the tension in the air snapped like a rubber band. I turned, expecting to see someone standing just beyond the threshold, but there was nothing. The bunker yawned open, its interior pitch black, as if nothing had ever stirred inside. My hands shook as I pulled the metal door shut, the heavy clang echoing through the woods. The weight in my chest didn't ease, not even as I stepped back, breathing hard. The photograph of me still sat in my palm, undeniable proof that I had been watched. I turned and left the bunker behind, pushing through the dense trees with quick steps. The forest felt different now, every rustling leaf and shifting shadow sending my nerves into overdrive. The bunker had been waiting for me, and whoever had taken that photo wasn't finished watching. The entire way back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on my back. I didn't look over my shoulder, didn't pause, didn't stop moving until I was safely inside. My hands fumbled with the keys, my breath unsteady as I locked the doors and started the engine. As I pulled onto the road, the photograph lay on the passenger seat, its edges curling slightly. The image of me at the bunker's entrance stared back, but something was different now. A figure stood just behind me, barely visible in the shadows. I hadn't been alone after all. Story 13. The asylum loomed ahead, its towering structure swallowed by overgrown vines and crumbling brick. The windows were shattered, jagged glass reflecting the dim light of the setting sun. The entrance doors hung slightly open, creaking as the wind pushed through. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, the air thick with dust and decay. The main hall stretched before me, lined with rusted gurneys and wheelchairs frozen in time. Papers were strewn across the floor, their edges curled and yellowed. The faint scent of mildew mixed with something metallic, something unsettling. The silence pressed against my ears, heavy and suffocating. I moved deeper into the asylum, my footsteps muffled by years of dust and debris. The walls were lined with peeling paint, revealing layers of forgotten history beneath. Doors stood ajar, revealing empty rooms with rusted bed frames and tattered restraints. A faint chill swept through the corridor, making my skin prickle. At the end of the hall, a locked door stood out against the decay. The metal latch was thick with rust, yet the hinges looked untouched. Something about it felt wrong, as if it had no place among the years of abandonment. I reached for the handle, my pulse quickening as I gave it a firm pull. The door groaned open, revealing a dark room beyond. The air inside was colder, the temperature dropping instantly as I stepped inside. My flashlight flickered, its beam casting uneven light across the walls. My breath caught as I took in the sight before me. The walls were covered in scratches, deep and jagged, carved into the plaster with frantic energy. Some marks were overlapping, others forming erratic patterns that seemed to have no meaning. The most disturbing part was their freshness. The edges of the marks were crisp, the dust from the carving still settling. Someone had been here recently. I ran my fingers over the scratches, feeling the rough indentations beneath my touch. Some were shallow, while others dug deep into the wall as if made in desperation. Words began to take shape among the chaotic markings. "Help me, not alone, and don't let it in" stood out, scrawled over and over. A noise echoed from the hallway, a soft shuffling sound that sent my heart into a frantic rhythm. I turned sharply, my flashlight sweeping the empty corridor beyond the doorway. The sound stopped, replaced by an eerie stillness that made my skin crawl. The asylum was supposed to be abandoned. I stepped back into the room, my pulse pounding against my ribs. The walls seemed closer now, the markings pressing in from all sides. My flashlight flickered again, the beam sputtering as if something unseen was interfering with it. A sharp sound cut through the silence, the unmistakable scrape of nails against plaster. The sound came from the far corner of the room, where the shadows were deepest. I strained my eyes, trying to make out any movement in the darkness. The scratching continued, slow and deliberate, as if whoever or whatever was making them knew I was watching. The air grew thick, a pressure settling over me like a heavy weight. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move forward. My legs felt stiff, reluctant, every instinct screaming at me to leave. The scratches grew more frantic, the sound now rapid and erratic. My flashlight finally stabilized, revealing something that made my blood turn to ice. The far wall, which had been covered in random markings just moments ago, now held a single clear message. "You shouldn't be here." The words were carved with deep, jagged strokes, fresh enough that flecks of white dust still clung to the wall beneath them. My stomach twisted as the realization sank in someone was here with me. A breath stirred the air behind me, warm and slow, too close to be imagined. Every muscle in my body locked as I turned, my heart slamming against my ribs. The room was empty, but the feeling of something unseen watching me was overwhelming. My throat tightened as I backed toward the door, my pulse hammering. The scratching started again, this time from all around me. It came from the walls, the ceiling, even the floor beneath my feet. My flashlight flickered violently, casting jagged shadows that seemed to shift and move on their own. The air grew colder, my breath visible in the dim light. I lunged for the door, my hands trembling as I gripped the rusted handle. It wouldn't budge, the wood suddenly swollen and stuck in place. The scratching intensified, a deafening cacophony that made my skin crawl. My name was whispered, a raspy voice slipping through the darkness. I slammed my shoulder against the door, my breath coming in short gasps. The whispers grew louder, overlapping in a frenzied chant. My flashlight gave one last sputter before dying completely, plunging the room into suffocating darkness. My fingers clawed at the door, my mind screaming for a way out. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The scratching ceased, the whispers vanished, and the air grew eerily still. My flashlight flickered back to life, its weak glow revealing the now silent room. The walls were untouched, the scratches completely gone. I stumbled back, my head spinning. Had I imagined it? The words, the sounds, the presence, none of it should have been real. But as I turned to leave, my gaze fell to the floor. A single, fresh scratch marked the wood beneath me, a deep groove leading straight to the doorway. I didn't wait to understand. I bolted from the room, slamming the door behind me as I ran down the hall. My breath came in ragged gasps, my legs burning as I pushed forward. The asylum seemed darker now, the walls closing in, the air pressing heavy against my skin. By the time I reached the entrance, my hands were shaking so badly I nearly fumbled with the door. The moment I stepped outside, the suffocating pressure lifted, the cool night air hitting me like a wave. I turned back once, my breath still ragged, my mind struggling to process what had happened. The door to the sealed room was shut tight once more, as if it had never been opened. The asylum stood silent, its dark windows revealing nothing of what lurked inside. But I knew better. Something had been in that room with me, and it wasn't finished. Story 14. The abandoned train station stood in eerie silence, its grand archways covered in layers of dust and grime. Vines crept up the walls, winding through the cracks of faded bricks, remnants of a place long forgotten. The rusted metal sign above the entrance still bore the station's name, but time had worn away most of the letters. As I stepped inside, my footsteps echoed across the empty floor, disturbing the dust that had settled undisturbed for years. Rows of wooden benches stood lined against the walls, their surfaces splintered and broken. Faded posters, their colors drained by time, clung to the walls, advertising destinations that no longer existed. The air smelled of damp wood and rust, thick with the scent of decay. Yet despite the emptiness, I felt as if I wasn't alone. In the center of the station, the old ticket booth loomed behind a cracked glass window. The wooden counter was covered in dust, and a rusted cash register sat untouched. The small door leading behind the booth was locked, its handle covered in rust, as if no one had touched it in decades. But there, sitting in the tray beneath the window, was a single train ticket. I hesitated before stepping closer, my breath catching in my throat. The ticket was pristine, untouched by dust or age, as if it had been placed there just moments ago. My fingers trembled as I reached out, flipping it over. My name was printed neatly across it in bold letters. A cold shiver crawled up my spine. I hadn't told anyone I was coming here. No one knew I had planned to explore this place. Yet someone had left this ticket for me, waiting as if they had known I would find it. My heart pounded as I glanced around the empty station, half expecting to see someone watching me from the shadows. The silence deepened, pressing in on me from all sides. The only exit was the way I had come, but something pulled my attention toward the platform beyond the ticket booth. I clutched the ticket in my hand and stepped forward, my body tense with unease. As I crossed through the archway leading to the tracks, I froze. A train stood on the rails, gleaming as if it had just arrived. Its surface was smooth, untouched by time or rust, completely out of place in the decaying station. The windows were dark, revealing nothing of the interior. The doors remained shut, as if waiting for passengers who would never come. I glanced down at the ticket in my hand. There was no departure time, no destination. Only my name. My fingers curled around it, my pulse racing. It felt like an invitation, one I wasn't sure I wanted to accept. But something deep in my chest urged me forward, a pull I couldn't explain. Taking slow steps toward the train, I hesitated at the door, waiting for anything to happen. As if on cue, the doors hissed open with a soft rush of air. A cold breeze spilled out, carrying a scent that was neither dust nor metal, but something unfamiliar. The train was inviting me in. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but my feet moved on their own. I stepped inside, and the doors slid shut behind me with a final, echoing click. The interior was dimly lit, rows of plush seats stretching out into the distance. It was eerily quiet, the air heavy with stillness. I walked slowly down the aisle, my fingers brushing against the seats. They were cold, too cold, as if no one had sat in them for a very long time. There were no signs of passengers, no luggage, no forgotten belongings. It was as if the train had never been used, waiting for someone waiting for me. A faint sound echoed from further down the car. I turned sharply, my breath catching in my throat. The sound was soft, rhythmic, like footsteps on carpet. I swallowed hard, scanning the empty aisle. There was no one there. I took a shaky step forward, my body tense with every movement. The sound had stopped, leaving only the deep, humming silence behind. I tried to steady my breathing, my fingers tightening around the ticket. Then, without warning, the lights overhead flickered. A deep groan rumbled beneath my feet, the train shuddering as if coming to life. My pulse spiked as I grabbed onto the nearest seat for balance. The air seemed to shift, growing colder, and outside the window, the world beyond the station blurred. Panic surged through me. I turned toward the door, pressing my hands against it, but it wouldn't budge. The handle refused to turn, locking me inside. My reflection in the glass looked pale, wide-eyed, breath fogging up the surface. Behind me, the shadow moved. I spun around, heart hammering against my ribs. The aisle was still empty, but the air was different, charged, like something unseen was watching. The train lurched forward, the sensation of movement sending my stomach twisting into knots. The station outside was gone, swallowed by darkness. My breath came in short gasps as I stumbled down the aisle, searching for another way out. I reached the next door and yanked on it, but it wouldn't open either. My reflection in the window flickered, shifting strangely, as if something was distorting the image. Then, from the far end of the car, a whisper curled through the air. My name. The voice was soft, almost gentle, but it sent ice through my veins. I turned slowly, dread pooling in my stomach. The train car stretched impossibly long now, the rows of seats multiplying, stretching into a hazy distance that hadn't been there before. A figure stood at the end of the aisle, shrouded in shadow, just out of reach. I couldn't make out a face, but I could feel its gaze. It was waiting. The train rattled harder, the lights dimming to a faint glow. The voice whispered again, closer this time. My name echoed through the car, curling around me like a cold breath. My fingers clenched around the ticket, the paper stiff and unyielding. I turned back to the window, desperate for any sign of the outside world, but there was nothing. Only endless blackness stretching beyond the glass, as if the train was moving through a void. My reflection stared back at me, wide-eyed and trembling. Then it smiled. A scream lodged in my throat as my reflection moved without me, its lips curling into something wrong, something inhuman. The lights flickered again, plunging the car into darkness. The last thing I heard was the voice whispering my name one final time before everything went silent. Story 15. The mansion had been abandoned for years, its grand structure left to crumble under time's weight. Vines curled around the stone walls, creeping into shattered windows like fingers reaching inside. The front door groaned as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the hollow space beyond. Dust swirled in the air, disturbed by my presence as I stepped inside. The grand foyer stretched before me, its once polished floors dulled beneath layers of dirt and debris. A massive chandelier hung above, its crystals coated in grime, swaying slightly despite the still air. Torn curtains barely clung to their rods, their fabric whispering against the walls. The air smelled of decay, a mixture of rotting wood and something faintly metallic. I moved deeper into the mansion, my footsteps muffled by thick layers of dust. Faded paintings lined the walls, their subjects staring blankly as I passed. The furniture was draped in white sheets, their ghostly forms adding to the unsettling atmosphere. It felt as though the house had been left in a hurry, abandoned in the middle of a life once lived. At the end of the hallway, I found a door slightly ajar. Pushing it open, I stepped into a long corridor lined with mirrors, their ornate frames dulled with age. The glass was cloudy in some places, warped in others, distorting my reflection as I walked past. The air here was heavier, colder, carrying the faint scent of something I couldn't quite place. I paused in front of one mirror, wiping away a layer of dust with my sleeve. My reflection stared back, slightly off, as if it lagged behind my movements by the smallest fraction of a second. A prickle of unease crawled up my spine as I glanced at the other mirrors. They stretched endlessly down the hall, reflecting me over and over, creating an illusion of infinite versions of myself. Then, in one of the mirrors, I saw it. A figure stood behind me, just at the edge of my vision, its shape dark and unmoving. My breath caught as my pulse thundered in my ears. Slowly I turned, expecting to see someone standing there. But the hallway was empty. A cold wave of fear washed over me as I turned back to the mirror. The figure was still there, closer now, its head tilted slightly as if watching me. I took a step back, my stomach twisting. My mind raced to find a logical explanation, but none came. The mirror seemed to pulse, the glass wavering as though something inside was trying to push through. The figure in the reflection remained motionless, but the air around me grew colder. My breath came out in visible puffs, a stark contrast to the heat of the summer day outside. I forced myself to move, walking quickly past the mirrors, avoiding my reflection. Each step felt heavier, the distance stretching longer than it should have. My reflection seemed to watch me from the corners of my vision, movements not quite matching my own. A sharp sound shattered the silence, a whisper, low and rasping, coming from behind me. My body tensed as I fought the urge to turn around. The air pressed against me, thick and suffocating, as if the house itself was alive and breathing. I reached the end of the hallway, my fingers fumbling for the doorknob. It was ice cold beneath my touch, my skin tingling as if something unseen were reaching through. With a desperate twist, I yanked the door open and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. The room was dark, the only light coming from the fractured windows casting long shadows across the floor. My heart pounded as I backed away, my eyes adjusting to the dimness. Dust floated lazily through the air, disturbed by my frantic movements. Then I saw it again. A mirror stood in the corner, its glass clean and untouched. My reflection was there, but I wasn't alone. The figure stood beside me now, its form more defined, a tall, shadowy presence with hollow eyes that seemed to drink in the light. My stomach lurched as its head turned toward me, its mouth opening in a silent, gaping void. The room grew colder, the darkness pressing in from all sides. My reflection twitched, my movements no longer my own. The thing in the mirror raised its hand, and my fingers tingled as if controlled by something unseen. I jerked away, breaking whatever hold it had over me. The whisper came again, closer this time, curling against my ear like a breath from something unseen. My muscles locked as fear gripped me, but I forced my legs to move. I stumbled toward the door, refusing to look at the mirrors as I threw it open. The hallway beyond was different now, stretched impossibly long, the mirrors warped and pulsing. Shadows flickered within the glass, shifting like they were alive. The figure was no longer behind me, it was everywhere, reflected in each mirror, waiting. I ran. The mirrors rattled as I passed, the sound like distant laughter echoing through the halls. The air grew thick, suffocating, pressing against my skin like unseen hands. My vision blurred, my pulse hammering as the front door came into view. Just as I reached it, something grabbed my wrist, cold, skeletal fingers wrapping around my skin. I wrenched free, my breath catching as I turned. The hallway was empty. The mirrors were still, reflecting nothing but the empty corridor. My shaking hands fumbled with the door, and I stumbled outside, gasping for air. The mansion loomed behind me, its windows dark and uninviting. The sun was still high in the sky, yet I felt as though I had been inside for hours, lost in something beyond time. I didn't look back as I ran, the weight of unseen eyes pressing against my back. The whispers still echoed in my ears, fading only when I reached the safety of my car. The mansion stood silent, its secrets hidden within its walls. As I drove away, my hands still trembling, I caught one last glimpse of the mansion in my rearview mirror. For the briefest moment, I saw a figure standing in one of the windows, watching. And then, just like before, it was gone. Story 16. The warehouse had been abandoned for years, its walls covered in grime and its floors littered with broken glass and debris. The air smelled of dust and mildew, thick with the scent of decay. I moved cautiously, my footsteps echoing through the vast, empty space. Rusted machinery stood like forgotten skeletons, their purpose lost to time. A faint hum reached my ears, distinct from the silence that had followed me since I entered. It came from somewhere deeper within, past the collapsed shelving units and stacks of rotting wooden crates. The sound was steady, mechanical, like an old motor still clinging to life. I followed it, drawn forward by curiosity and an unease I couldn't quite name. The hum grew louder as I approached a partially open door at the end of a narrow hallway. Faint light spilled from within, flickering as if struggling to stay alive. My pulse quickened as I reached out and pushed the door open, the rusted hinges groaning in protest. Inside, a projector sat in the center of the room, its reels spinning, casting images onto the cracked white wall ahead. At first, I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. The footage was grainy, black and white, with a slight distortion running along the edges. It showed a long, empty corridor, much like the one I had just walked through. The camera angle shifted, as if it were being carried, scanning the abandoned space with slow, deliberate movements. Then I saw myself. My breath caught in my throat as I watched my own figure appear on the screen, walking through the warehouse exactly as I had minutes before. I moved cautiously in the footage, turning my head as if listening to something unseen. The camera followed me, recording every step, every hesitant glance. My fingers tightened around the edge of the doorframe, the cold metal biting into my skin. I turned sharply, scanning the room for any sign of another presence. The only source of light came from the projector, casting long, shifting shadows along the walls. The machine whirred steadily, its film running as if untouched by time. There was no camera, no operator, nothing that should have been recording me. My gaze returned to the footage, and my stomach twisted. The version of me on the screen had stopped walking. I stood still in the recording, staring ahead at something just beyond the camera's view. My posture was rigid, my expression unreadable, but I could feel the tension even through the grainy film. I stepped back, my pulse hammering. The image flickered, and suddenly the version of me on the screen turned its head. But it wasn't mirroring my movement, it was looking directly at me. My breath hitched as I locked eyes with my own reflection on the screen, the black and white version of myself holding a gaze that felt too real, too aware. The room seemed to grow smaller, the air thick and suffocating. The film continued playing, but I could no longer tell if it was still following past events or something else entirely. My body in the footage took slow, careful steps toward the camera, the movement deliberate, calculated. My real self remained frozen, unable to look away. The flickering intensified, the film jumping as if struggling to keep up. The recorded version of me reached out, their hand extending toward the screen. My heart pounded as I watched, my own fingers twitching involuntarily at my sides. The distorted image grew closer, filling the wall with its looming presence. A loud snap echoed through the room, and the film cut to static. The projector's reel spun wildly, the sound of empty film whipping through the machine. The shadows in the room deepened, stretching unnaturally against the walls. My skin prickled with the overwhelming sense that I was no longer alone. A faint shuffle came from the hallway outside. My body tensed, every nerve screaming for me to move, to run, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. The static buzzed louder, filling my ears, drowning out every other sound. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see the darkened hallway through the open door. A figure stood there. My throat tightened as I took a slow, unsteady step back. The figure didn't move, remaining perfectly still in the shadows. Its form was vague, human-shaped but featureless, like an outline carved from the darkness itself. The static from the projector pulsed, almost as if reacting to the presence in the doorway. The figure stepped forward. I stumbled back, my legs finally obeying the desperate commands of my mind. The air in the room felt heavier, pressing down on me like unseen hands. The static on the wall flickered again, and for a brief moment, the footage returned. But it was different now. It showed me standing in the same room, my face pale, my body trembling. But behind me, in the dim glow of the projector's light, the shadowed figure loomed. Its shape wavered, shifting as though barely contained within the film's frame. My breath came in ragged gasps as I turned my head slightly, afraid to confirm what the footage already showed. The room was empty. The figure was no longer in the doorway, no longer in the shadows. But I could feel it standing just behind me, so close that the air felt cold against my neck. The static crackled, the projector's film spinning faster, the images distorting into something unrecognizable. I lunged forward, slamming my hand against the projector's switch. The machine groaned, the reel halting with a harsh screech. The room plunged into darkness, the only sound my own ragged breathing. I didn't wait. I bolted out of the room, my footsteps echoing wildly through the warehouse. The hallways stretched endlessly before me, twisting and unfamiliar despite having walked them before. Every shadow felt alive, every corner held something unseen, watching. My breath burned in my chest as I reached the entrance, shoving open the rusted doors with all my strength. The night air hit me like a wave, sharp and freezing. I stumbled outside, barely able to catch my breath. The warehouse loomed behind me, silent and dark once more. But as I looked back, something flickered in one of the upper windows, a dim, unsteady light, like the glow of a projector still running. Story 17. The fire station stood at the edge of town, its faded red bricks covered in creeping vines. The windows were shattered in places, allowing glimpses of the dark interior beyond. The main doors were rusted but slightly ajar, as if waiting for someone to step inside. The air smelled of damp concrete and old smoke, remnants of a past long forgotten. I stepped into the station, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. Rows of lockers lined the walls, their doors left open, revealing rusted helmets and torn jackets. A thick layer of dust coated the floor, except for a few faint disturbances near the garage. It was as if someone had been here recently, though the building had been abandoned for years. The silence pressed in as I made my way deeper into the station. The main hallway led to a set of heavy doors, which I pushed open with a groan of metal. Beyond them, the garage stretched wide, filled with old equipment and tools left scattered across workbenches. In the center of it all sat an old fire truck, its red paint dulled by time but still intact. The truck shouldn't have been there, not after all these years. Everything else had been stripped away, yet it remained, untouched by time. I approached cautiously, running my fingers along the cold metal of its exterior. That was when I noticed that the hood of the truck was warm, as if the engine had been running only moments before. A chill crept up my spine as I stepped back, my breath quickening. The truck should have been ice cold like everything else in this place. My fingers tingled where I had touched the metal, a lingering warmth that shouldn't have been possible. The unsettling feeling only deepened as the air grew heavy, thick with something unseen. The silence shattered with an ear-splitting wail as the sirens blared to life. The sudden noise sent me stumbling backward, my heart hammering in my chest. The garage filled with the deafening sound, red and white lights flashing wildly against the walls. My breath hitched as I turned toward the driver's seat, half expecting someone to be sitting there. The seat was empty. The keys dangled from the ignition, swinging slightly as if someone had just let go of them. My pulse pounded as I watched the dashboard flicker, the dials moving on their own. The truck rumbled softly, as if it were alive, as if it had been waiting for someone to notice it. I spun around, scanning the garage for any sign of movement. The tools on the workbenches rattled slightly, vibrating from the force of the sirens. A set of old turnout gear hung on the wall, swaying as though disturbed by an unseen presence. The walls themselves seemed to hum, the noise burrowing into my bones. I took a step back, then another, my instincts screaming at me to leave. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the sirens cut off instantly. The silence that followed was worse than the noise, thick and unnatural. I stood frozen, my breath coming in sharp gasps, waiting for anything to happen next. Then, slowly, the fire truck's engine sputtered to life. My stomach twisted as the headlights flickered on, casting long, eerie beams across the garage. The truck let out a low, shuddering growl, its tires shifting slightly as if it were about to move. My feet felt rooted to the ground, dread pooling in my stomach. A faint whisper drifted through the air, barely audible over the rumble of the engine. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent, insistent. It sent a cold shiver through me, making my skin crawl. The whisper grew louder, echoing through the garage, overlapping voices blending into something unintelligible. I turned sharply, ready to bolt, but the garage doors were still shut, trapping me inside. My hands trembled as I reached for the rusted latch, tugging hard, but it wouldn't budge. Behind me, the truck let out a sharp hiss of steam, the temperature in the room rising with it. The smell of smoke filled my nostrils, thick and choking. The whispers reached a fever pitch, swirling around me, pressing against my ears. I clenched my jaw, forcing my hands to steady as I threw my weight against the doors. A loud bang echoed through the space as something slammed into the truck, shaking the floor beneath me. I didn't dare turn around. With one last desperate pull, the latch gave way, and I stumbled forward into the night air. My legs felt weak as I staggered back, my pulse racing. The station loomed behind me, dark and silent once more. The truck's headlights flickered, then dimmed, the last sign of movement fading into the shadows. I didn't stop moving until I was well away from the building, my breath ragged and unsteady. When I finally dared to glance back, the station stood as it had before, lifeless, abandoned. But deep in the darkness of the garage, I thought I saw something shift, a shadow that hadn't been there before. The fire truck remained where it was, still and quiet. But I knew it wasn't truly dormant. Something inside that station had been waiting, and for a moment it had awakened. The warmth of the engine, the blaring sirens, the whispered voices I had disturbed something that should have been left alone. Even now I can still hear the sirens in my head, the echoes of something long gone but not forgotten. The station may have been abandoned, but it wasn't empty. Whatever haunted those walls had made itself known, and I had no intention of ever going back to find out why. Story 18. The hotel loomed at the end of the street, its facade crumbling beneath years of neglect. The once grand sign above the entrance was barely legible, its letters weathered and broken. Windows stared out like empty eyes, some shattered, others coated in grime so thick that no light could penetrate. The building had an eerie presence, standing forgotten yet somehow waiting. I hesitated before stepping inside, my boots crunching against shattered glass and debris. The air was thick with dust, the scent of mildew and decay pressing against my skin. The grand chandelier that had once greeted guests now hung crooked, its crystals coated in filth. Faded wallpaper peeled in long, curling strips, exposing rotted wood beneath. The silence was oppressive, thick and unmoving, as if the hotel itself was holding its breath. My footsteps echoed against the marble floor, the sound unnaturally loud. The front desk stood at the far end of the lobby, its polished wood now dull and splintered. My fingers trailed along the surface, feeling the grit of years past. Then I saw him. A bellhop stood behind the desk, still as a statue, his uniform neat despite the decay surrounding him. His hat sat perfectly on his head, his gloved hands resting on the counter. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at me with dark, unreadable eyes. My breath caught, my pulse hammering in my ears. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to step closer, my throat dry. His presence made no sense. The hotel had been abandoned for decades, yet here he was. His skin was pale, his expression frozen somewhere between a polite smile and something more hollow. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words refused to come. A gust of wind stirred the dust, making the chandelier creak above me. The bellhop remained motionless, his gaze locked onto mine with an intensity that sent a shiver through me. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. He was real, wasn't he? The way the dim light cast a shadow behind him suggested he wasn't just some trick of the eye. I cleared my throat, my voice barely above a whisper. "Hello." The word felt small in the vast emptiness of the lobby. The bellhop didn't respond, his lips slightly parted as if he had just been about to speak. My pulse pounded, my instinct screaming at me to leave. A sudden noise made me flinch, a sharp tapping sound from somewhere deeper in the hotel. My head snapped toward the hallway leading to the guest rooms, where darkness stretched like an open mouth. When I turned back to the desk, the bellhop was gone. The space behind the counter was empty, as if he had never been there at all. My breath came in short, uneven bursts as I stepped backward. The silence felt heavier now, thick with something unseen. The tapping sound returned, slow and deliberate, like fingers drumming against wood. My gaze darted toward the hallway again, but I saw nothing beyond the shadows. I forced myself to move, my feet carrying me toward the exit, even as something inside me screamed to run. As I reached the doors, a voice, low and distant, whispered my name. My blood ran cold, my fingers trembling as I pushed against the heavy wood. The doors didn't budge. Panic surged through me as I shoved harder, my hands slick with sweat. The air in the lobby seemed to shift, the temperature dropping. A soft creak echoed behind me, the sound of weight settling on old floorboards. I turned slowly, my stomach twisting into knots. The bellhop was back. He stood in the middle of the lobby now, closer than before, his expression unchanged. His eyes bore into mine, dark and hollow, as if something else looked through them. My breath came in shallow gasps, my body frozen in place. He raised one gloved hand and pointed toward the hallway. The tapping sound grew louder, more insistent, as if calling me forward. My heart pounded so hard it hurt, but I couldn't move. The shadows in the hallway seemed deeper now, shifting in ways that defied explanation. The bellhop took a step forward, his polished shoes barely making a sound against the marble. My paralysis broke, and I stumbled back against the door, my hands fumbling for anything to grip. The voice whispered my name again, closer this time, curling around me like a breath against my ear. Something in the air changed, a force pressing against me, urging me toward the hallway. The bellhop's stare never wavered, his hand still outstretched. My body fought against itself, every instinct screamed to escape, but something deeper pulled me forward. I forced myself to close my eyes, to break the spell of his gaze. My fingers clawed at the door handle, my breaths ragged and uneven. I turned it with every ounce of strength I had left, praying it would open. For a moment, nothing happened, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me. Then, the door gave way. I stumbled backward onto the cracked pavement outside, gasping for air as the night swallowed me whole. My heart pounded in my chest, my body trembling as I turned back to the entrance. The doors stood open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. The lobby was empty. The silence of the street was deafening after the oppressive stillness inside. The neon remnants of the hotel's old sign flickered weakly above me, casting distorted shadows across the ground. I stepped away, my legs unsteady, my mind struggling to make sense of what had just happened. As I turned to leave, I felt it again, that pull, that whisper at the back of my mind. A slow, dreadful certainty settled over me, chilling me to my core. The bellhop hadn't just been staring at me. He had been waiting. Story 19. The school loomed ahead, its windows shattered, and its brick walls covered in vines. The front doors were slightly ajar, as if waiting for someone to step inside. The air smelled of damp wood and dust, the scent of abandonment thick in the halls. My footsteps echoed as I moved forward, my breath shallow with unease. Lockers lined the walls, their doors rusted and bent, some hanging open to reveal books long eaten away by time. Old posters, faded and peeling, still clung stubbornly to the walls. The silence was unsettling, broken only by the distant creak of the building settling. As I moved deeper, a chill crawled down my spine, an unshakable feeling of being watched creeping over me. I reached the gymnasium doors and pushed them open, the hinges groaning in protest. The space inside was massive, its once polished wooden floor now dull and warped from neglect. Rows of bleachers stretched along the walls, their seats covered in a thick layer of dust. The scoreboard hung overhead, frozen on a time long forgotten. At first, the gym seemed empty, just another hollow remnant of the past. Then, the soft, rhythmic sound of something bouncing broke the silence. My heart lurched as I turned toward the center of the court. Several basketballs were moving, bouncing slowly, methodically, as if guided by invisible hands. The sound of distant footsteps sent a shiver through me. They were faint, just beyond the gym, steady and deliberate. My pulse quickened as I scanned the shadows, but I saw no one. The air felt heavier, charged with something unseen, something unnatural. The bouncing basketballs moved faster, thudding against the worn floor in an eerie, synchronized rhythm. I took a slow step back, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The footsteps outside the gymnasium grew louder, closing in, their pace unhurried yet relentless. It felt as if something was approaching, something I couldn't see. A loud bang echoed from the far end of the gym, making me jump. One of the doors slammed shut on its own, the force sending a sharp gust of air through the room. My skin prickled as I turned back to the court, only to find the basketballs had stopped bouncing. They now sat still, perfectly arranged in a straight line. The silence was unbearable, pressing against my ears like a physical weight. Then, the sound of laughter, light, distant, and unmistakably childlike, drifted through the air. My stomach twisted as I scanned the bleachers, the shadows stretching long across the seats. The laughter came again, this time closer, followed by the shuffle of unseen feet. I took a cautious step toward the exit, every instinct screaming at me to leave. But as I reached the doors, they slammed shut with a force that rattled the entire gym. My breath hitched as I grabbed the handle, yanking at it with all my strength. It wouldn't budge, as if something on the other side was holding it closed. The overhead lights flickered, casting erratic shadows across the court. The basketballs rolled slightly, shifting as if drawn by an unseen force. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, drowning out every other sound. Then, a voice low and distorted whispered from somewhere behind me, "Stay and play." I spun around, my back pressing against the door, my hand still gripping the handle. The court was empty, yet the air felt thick with unseen presence. The bleachers creaked, as if someone was moving across them, yet I saw nothing. My legs trembled as I fought the rising panic, my breath shallow and unsteady. The scoreboard flickered to life, its screen displaying a countdown. The numbers ticked down from 30, glowing in ominous red. My fingers tightened around the door handle, desperation taking hold. I pounded against the door, calling out, but my voice only echoed back at me, swallowed by the vast emptiness of the gym. The countdown reached 15, and the bouncing resumed. The basketballs moved faster, their erratic thuds filling the space like a racing heartbeat. The whispers returned, overlapping, a chorus of voices speaking in hushed, unintelligible tones. The walls of the gym seemed to close in, the air growing colder with every passing second. At 5 seconds, the bleachers rattled violently, dust cascading from the rafters above. The laughter rose into a distorted, high-pitched wail, sending ice through my veins. My vision blurred as the final second blinked on the scoreboard, the red numbers burning into my mind. Then, everything stopped. The silence was deafening, the weight of it pressing against my chest. The basketballs lay motionless once more, the air unnaturally still. I tried the door again, my hands shaking, and this time it gave way. I stumbled back into the hallway, my legs weak beneath me. The school felt darker now, the shadows heavier. As I turned to leave, I cast one last glance at the gymnasium. The doors remained open, the court eerily quiet. But just as I was about to turn away, something shifted in the darkness of the bleachers. A figure, small, indistinct, stood there, watching. The laughter echoed one final time, carrying with it a whispered message. "See you next time." Story 20. The house stood alone at the edge of the woods, its wooden frame warped and brittle from years of abandonment. Vines curled around the broken porch railings, their tendrils creeping through shattered windows. The front door hung slightly ajar, swaying with the wind as if beckoning me inside. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and decay, a silence pressing heavily around the structure. Stepping inside, the floorboards groaned beneath my weight, the sound swallowed by the emptiness. Dust swirled in the dim light filtering through torn curtains, casting shifting patterns across the ruined furniture. Broken picture frames lay scattered on the floor, their glass cracked and clouded with time. The deeper I went, the more the house seemed frozen in a moment long past, untouched yet crumbling. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with closed doors that stood like silent sentinels. A faint ticking sound drifted from one of the rooms, barely audible but persistent. It was the only sound in the otherwise suffocating stillness, a rhythmic pulse in the heart of the house. My curiosity drew me forward, my fingers brushing against the peeling wallpaper as I approached the source. Pushing open the door, I found myself in a room filled with clocks of every size and design. Grandfather clocks towered against the walls, their pendulums motionless. Cuckoo clocks, mantel clocks, and pocket watches lined shelves and tables, all of them covered in a thick layer of dust. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of aged metal and old wood, and yet the ticking grew louder, pulsing in the silence. Every clock in the room was frozen, their hands stopped at different times as if abandoned mid-moment. But as I stepped further inside, a single chime rang out, sharp and clear. My breath caught as I turned toward the sound. One clock, an ornate, antique wall clock, was still running. The second hand twitched with precise movements, circling the face with quiet determination. The chime struck again, louder this time, vibrating through the air with an unnatural resonance. I watched in stunned silence as the hands began to move, spinning forward at an impossible speed. The ticking grew frantic, a chaotic symphony filling the room. My pulse quickened as a chill crept up my spine, the overwhelming sensation that something unseen had awakened. The clock struck midnight. The sound rang out like a final note, reverberating through the walls, making the floor tremble beneath me. The air shifted, sudden and sharp, as if the house had inhaled. The other clocks remained silent, their hands still frozen, but the room felt different now, more aware, more watching. A whisper of movement brushed behind me, too close to be imagined. My breath hitched as I turned sharply, scanning the dimly lit room. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, shifting without reason, deepening in corners where the light could not reach. The house, once merely abandoned, now felt occupied. I backed away toward the door, the old wood groaning under my every step. The moment my fingers brushed the doorknob, the ticking ceased. The silence that followed was unbearable, thick and absolute, pressing against my ears. It was then that I noticed it. The dust in the room had shifted. Where once it had lain undisturbed, now there were patterns, faint but unmistakable. Footprints. They led directly to where I stood. A cold breath of air stirred against my neck, and my body locked in place. I felt it before I heard it, the faintest whisper, so near it sent shivers down my spine. My name drawn out in a voice that did not belong to me. The paralysis broke and I yanked the door open, stumbling into the hallway with my heart hammering against my ribs. The house had changed. The walls seemed to stretch higher, the corridor darker than before. I forced myself forward, refusing to look back, the weight of unseen eyes pressing against my back. The front door was ahead, its warped frame barely visible in the dim light, but each step felt heavier, as if something resisted my escape. A sudden chime echoed from behind me, loud and clear. Midnight, again. The realization sent a wave of dread crashing over me. I had lost track of time. I had been inside longer than I thought. The clock had not merely counted the hour, it had reset it. The walls groaned as I reached the threshold, the very foundation seeming to tremble. I stepped outside, the air thick and humid, the scent of damp earth flooding my senses. The moment my foot touched the porch, the house fell silent once more. No ticking, no whispering wind, just a heavy, watchful stillness. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My car sat where I had left it, an anchor to the world beyond this place. I climbed inside, my fingers unsteady on the ignition, but the car hesitated before starting, as if it too had been caught in the clock's spell. When the engine roared to life, I sped away, the house shrinking in my rearview mirror, its dark windows staring back. As I drove, my mind raced over what had happened. The ticking, The chimes, the whisper of my name, it all felt unreal. But as the road stretched ahead, a quiet dread settled deep in my bones. The clock had struck midnight twice, and I had no way of knowing if I had ever truly left. Story 21. The hospital stood in eerie silence, its windows shattered and its walls streaked with years of neglect. The air was thick with the scent of dust and decay, the remnants of forgotten lives lingering in the dimly lit corridors. My footsteps echoed as I moved cautiously, my flashlight cutting through the oppressive darkness. The deeper I went, the more the feeling of unease settled in my chest. Faded signs still marked the rooms, their letters barely legible beneath layers of grime. Wheelchairs sat abandoned in corners, their rusted wheels frozen in place. Medical charts lay scattered across the floor, their pages curling with age. It felt as though the hospital had been left in a hurry, as if something had driven everyone out. I turned a corner and came face to face with a door unlike the others. A large no-entry sign was nailed to its surface, its edges peeling away. The door itself was pristine compared to the surrounding decay, its handle free of dust. My pulse quickened as I reached out, testing the knob. The door swung open with a creak, revealing a small, dimly lit room. A single bed sat in the center, the sheets perfectly tucked, as if waiting for a patient to return. Beside it, a clipboard rested on a metal stand, the paper crisp and unblemished. I stepped closer, my eyes scanning the chart. At the top, in bold, unmistakable letters, was my name. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at it, my mind racing for an explanation. The chart detailed medical information I didn't recognize, notes written in a precise, clinical hand. I flipped through the pages, my fingers trembling as I scanned words like observation period, unresponsive, and pending evaluation. A cold sweat formed at the nape of my neck as I searched for a date, for any indication of when this was written. There was none. The ink looked fresh, as if the chart had been updated recently. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I looked around the room, suddenly feeling watched. The air seemed heavier, the silence almost suffocating. I turned toward the door, my gut screaming at me to leave, but something made me hesitate. A faint rustling sound echoed from the hall, barely audible but unmistakable. I wasn't alone. I held my breath, listening. The sound was slow, deliberate footsteps. They moved steadily, drawing closer to the room. I stepped back, my gaze darting to the shadows pooling in the corners. There was nowhere to hide. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. I gripped the chart, my hands clammy against the smooth paper. Seconds stretched into eternity as the silence pressed down on me. And then, the doorknob twisted. A jolt of fear shot through me as I backed against the bed, my pulse hammering. The door didn't open, but the knob continued to turn, slow and controlled, as if someone was testing the lock. My breath came in shallow gasps as I searched for any way out. The only other exit was a small supply closet in the corner. I lunged toward it, yanking the door open and slipping inside, just as the main door creaked open. I pressed myself against the shelves, my entire body rigid. Through the small gap in the door, I saw a figure step inside. Dressed in a pale hospital gown, they moved with an unsettling slowness, their head tilted slightly to the side. I could see only part of their face enough to know it was wrong. Their skin was too pale, almost translucent, their eyes sunken, as if they had never seen the light. They stopped at the bed, their head turning toward the clipboard still clutched in my hand. I swallowed hard, my grip tightening around it as if it could protect me. The figure didn't speak, didn't move closer, just stood there. silent and expectant. I fought the urge to bolt, forcing myself to stay still. The figure slowly reached out, their fingers brushing the empty sheets. A low, breathy sigh escaped them, as if in disappointment. Then, with the same eerie slowness, they turned toward the closet. My chest tightened as they took a single step forward. My fingers curled around a rusted scalpel on the shelf, my only defense if they opened the door. The air between us felt charged, thick with something I couldn't name. Then, as suddenly as they had come, they stopped. Their head tilted again, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. A moment later, they turned and walked back to the door. I waited, barely breathing, until I heard the soft click of the door shutting. My legs felt weak as I pushed the closet door open, stepping out into the empty room. The figure was gone, but on the bed where the sheets had been perfectly smooth was a single folded piece of paper. With shaking hands, I picked it up. 3 words were scrawled in neat, precise handwriting. "Come back soon." A shiver ran through me as I dropped the note, my body moving before my mind could catch up. I sprinted out of the room, down the dark hallway, my own footsteps echoing wildly around me. I didn't stop until I burst through the hospital's rusted entrance, the cool night air slamming against my face. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if the figure was still watching. The clipboard was still clutched in my hand, the proof of what I had seen, of what knew my name. But even now, as I lie awake at night, I can still hear the sound of that door creaking open. I still see that figure in the gown waiting by the bed. And somewhere, in the depths of that abandoned hospital, I know my room is still there, waiting for me. Story 22. The theater had been abandoned for decades, its once grand entrance now barely recognizable beneath layers of grime and ivy. The old marquee was shattered, its rusted frame barely clinging to the building. As I stepped inside, the scent of dust and decay thickened in the stale air. The wooden doors groaned in protest, as if reluctant to let me in. The lobby was frozen in time, with faded posters peeling from the walls and a long, dry concession stand left to rot. My footsteps echoed eerily, each step sending a whisper of dust swirling through the dim light. Torn velvet ropes still hung between rusted stanchions, guiding non-existent guests toward the grand auditorium. The silence pressed in, deep and unnatural, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Pushing open the heavy doors to the main hall, I was met with rows upon rows of tattered seats, their upholstery shredded by time and vermin. The stage loomed ahead, its curtains faded and sagging, as if waiting for a performance that would never come. A few broken chandeliers hung precariously above, their crystals coated in grime. The only illumination came from my flashlight, casting long shadows across the ruined space. As I stepped down the aisle, my light caught something out of place. Amid the dust-covered, decaying seats, one row gleamed unnaturally clean. The cushions looked untouched, their deep red fabric polished and smooth, as if waiting for an audience. The contrast was unsettling, an impossible island of preservation in the theater's ruin. My curiosity overpowered my unease, pulling me toward them. I ran my fingers over the velvet, feeling its softness beneath the dust-free surface. There was no logical explanation for how these seats had remained pristine while everything else had fallen into decay. It felt as though someone or something had been taking care of them. Against my better judgment, I lowered myself into one of the chairs. The cushion gave slightly beneath me, cool and firm, unlike the brittle, rotting fabric of the others. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a shift in the air made the hairs on my arms rise. The seat beside me creaked, as if someone had just sat down. My pulse quickened as I turned my head, but the seat was empty. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. The feeling wasn't just a trick of the mind, there was weight pressing down on the cushion next to me. A presence, unseen but undeniable. The space beside me was cold, the air thick with something I couldn't name. I gripped the armrests, every instinct screaming at me to get up, to leave, but I couldn't move. A whisper brushed against my ear, so faint I almost didn't catch it. The sound was distant, yet close, an unintelligible murmur of voices overlapping. The stage remained empty, the room still, but the atmosphere had shifted. The theater no longer felt abandoned, it felt occupied. My breath came in short, uneven bursts as I forced myself to stand. As soon as I did, the seat beside me creaked again, this time as if someone had risen as well. I turned sharply, heart hammering, but nothing was there. The row of polished seats stood as they had before, untouched and unoccupied. Yet the weight of unseen eyes pressed down on me, thick and suffocating. I took a step back, my mind racing for an explanation. Maybe the air had shifted, maybe the building settling had caused the noise, but deep down I knew better. The theater had been waiting. The seats had been waiting, and whatever had joined me was still there, watching. I backed away toward the aisle, my legs unsteady. The air grew colder with each step, as if something was following me. The whispers grew louder, still indistinct but urgent, surrounding me from all sides. My flashlight flickered, casting frantic beams of light against the crumbling walls. I had to get out. Turning toward the exit, I felt a sudden pressure on my shoulder, a light touch, almost like fingers. A shock of cold ran through me, paralyzing me for a brief moment. The unseen hand lingered for only a second before releasing me, but the message was clear. I wasn't alone. I didn't hesitate any longer. I ran up the aisle, my breath ragged, my footsteps pounding against the dust-covered floor. The whispers followed, rising in pitch, until they became a chorus of voices overlapping in a chaotic, desperate murmur. The theater seemed to close in around me, the ceiling stretching higher, the walls tightening, as if trying to keep me inside. Bursting through the lobby doors, I nearly stumbled down the steps outside. The moment I crossed the threshold, the voices stopped. The air was still again, the silence pressing in like a heavy weight. I turned back, expecting to see movement in the darkness beyond the doors, but there was nothing. Just the same empty, decaying theater. I stood there, chest heaving, my body trembling from the cold that still clung to me. The seats had been perfect, untouched by time, as if waiting for someone to return. And when I had sat down, something had answered. The realization chilled me to my core. I had been a guest in something else's theater. I stepped away, unwilling to linger any longer. As I made my way back to the street, the weight of unseen eyes never left me. The polished seats, the whispering voices, the invisible presence, none of it made sense. But one thing was certain. The theater was not empty, and it never had been. Story 23. The entrance to the abandoned zoo was hidden behind layers of rusted fencing and overgrown vines. The metal sign above the gate hung crookedly, its letters faded with time. Beyond it, the pathways were cracked, weeds splitting through the concrete like veins. The eerie silence of the place sent a chill through me, making me question why I had come. I stepped forward, my shoes crunching over fallen leaves and bits of broken glass. The remnants of old animal enclosures lined the pathways, their bars rusted and twisted. Signs still clung to some of the cages, their words barely legible beneath years of dirt and weathering. A faint, musty scent lingered in the air, the ghost of animals that had once lived here. Further in, I spotted the remnants of what had once been a tiger's enclosure. The cage was larger than the others, its thick iron bars towering over me. A weathered sign nearby read, "Bengal tiger, keep your distance," though the warning felt unnecessary now. The zoo had been abandoned for years, and whatever had once been inside was long gone. I approached the enclosure, my fingers trailing over the cold metal bars. My breath hitched as I noticed something strange deep. Fresh scratches lined the iron, the grooves sharp and unmistakable. They hadn't been made by time or rust. Something had clawed at the bars recently. A rustling sound echoed from within the enclosure, soft at first, then more distinct. My muscles tensed as I peered through the gaps between the bars, my heart pounding. The interior was dark, the remnants of an old artificial rock den blocking most of my view. The sound came again, something shifting in the shadows. I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. Logic told me it was impossible. There was no way an animal had survived in this place for years without food or care. And yet the scratches were fresh, and the sound inside the enclosure was undeniable. Something was in there with me. The door to the enclosure hung open, its rusted hinges barely holding it upright. I hesitated before stepping inside, my hands brushing against the cold metal frame. The scent of damp earth filled my nose, mixed with something faintly metallic. My breath came in short gasps as I moved deeper, my footsteps careful against the cracked concrete. The artificial rock formation in the corner loomed ahead, its surface chipped and faded. My fingers brushed against it as I moved closer, my skin prickling with unease. The shadows beneath the structure seemed impossibly deep, swallowing what little light remained. Another rustle echoed from within, closer this time. A sudden gust of wind rattled the bars behind me, sending a shiver up my spine. I turned instinctively, my heartbeat hammering against my ribs. For a moment, I thought I saw movement beyond the enclosure, a flicker of something shifting just out of sight. My throat tightened as I took a step back. Then, a low growl rumbled from the darkness ahead, deep and resonant. My breath caught in my throat as I froze in place, every instinct screaming at me to run. The sound was unmistakable, primal, dangerous, and far too real to be my imagination. The air grew thick, pressing against my skin like an unseen weight. My pulse roared in my ears as I took another step back, my legs stiff with fear. The growl came again, this time followed by the sound of claws scraping against concrete. My flashlight flickered as I lifted it, the beam shaking with my unsteady hands. The shadows shifted, something stirring just beyond my reach. A pair of eyes gleamed in the darkness, reflecting the weak light with an unnatural glow. My stomach lurched as I realized they were locked onto me, unblinking. The figure remained still, its outline barely visible within the shadows of the den. The presence was overwhelming, suffocating in its intensity. I took another step back, my breath coming in short gasps. My foot caught on a loose piece of concrete, sending me stumbling. The sound echoed loudly, breaking the tense silence. In an instant, the figure in the darkness lunged forward, its movement swift and predatory. I barely had time to react before a massive shape burst from the den, its form cutting through the darkness with terrifying speed. My flashlight flickered wildly, casting fragmented glimpses of sleek fur, powerful muscles, and claws that glinted like knives. I scrambled backward, my hands scraping against the rough ground. The creature stopped just before the light, lingering at the edge of the shadows. Its growl reverberated through the enclosure, sending a shudder down my spine. My chest tightened as I fought the urge to bolt, knowing instinctively that any sudden movement could trigger an attack. The air between us felt charged, thick with something ancient and feral. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature retreated. It moved back into the darkness, its glowing eyes the last thing visible before vanishing entirely. The silence that followed was deafening, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. My muscles trembled as I forced myself to breathe. I scrambled to my feet, my heart still hammering. The enclosure felt smaller now, the walls pressing in on all sides. I turned and ran, my breath ragged as I sprinted out of the cage and back toward the overgrown pathways. The zoo stretched before me, dark and endless, the weight of unseen eyes lingering on my back. By the time I reached the exit, my legs burned and my lungs ached. I gripped the rusted fence, my fingers curling around the cold metal as I sucked in deep gulps of air. The night was silent once more, the eerie stillness settling over the abandoned grounds like a heavy fog. I glanced back once, my stomach twisting. The tiger's enclosure loomed in the distance, its bars gleaming faintly under the moonlight. The fresh scratches remained, a silent reminder of what lay within. I knew without a doubt that I had not been alone in there. The logical part of my mind tried to reason with what I had seen, but deep down I knew the truth. The zoo was abandoned, but something still lived inside, something that had been waiting, something that was watching. Story 24. The mansion loomed ahead, its once grand facade now cloaked in decay. Ivy crawled up the stone walls, wrapping around the towering columns like a slow, suffocating grip. The heavy wooden doors were slightly ajar, creaking softly as the wind pushed against them. I hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, my footsteps echoing through the empty hall. Dust floated in the air, catching the dim light filtering through cracked windows. A grand chandelier hung from the ceiling, its crystals dulled by years of neglect. The air smelled of aged wood, damp fabric, and something faintly metallic. Long-forgotten furniture lined the walls, their upholstery tattered and faded. The silence pressed against me as I wandered deeper into the mansion. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight, the sound swallowed by the vastness of the space. An old grandfather clock stood motionless in the corner, its hands frozen at an unknown hour. I ran my fingers along the banister of a sweeping staircase, feeling the dust collect against my skin. A long hallway stretched ahead, lined with paintings and elaborate gold frames. The faces within them were stern and lifeless, their eyes following me as I walked past. Some portraits were cracked, their colors faded, as if time itself had tried to erase them. My gaze drifted across the artwork until one painting made me stop in my tracks. The canvas depicted a family dressed in early 19th century clothing, their expressions solemn. A man and a woman stood at the center, their hands resting on the shoulders of two children. The older child was a boy, his dark eyes staring straight ahead. But it was the younger child that made my breath hitch. The girl looked exactly like me. My stomach twisted as I stepped closer, my eyes locked on her face. The resemblance was uncanny, the same shape of my eyes, the curve of my lips, even the faint scar near my eyebrow that I had gotten as a child. My pulse pounded in my ears as I reached out, my fingers hovering just above the painted surface. The air shifted, a faint whisper brushing against my ear. I turned sharply, but the hallway was empty. The house had been silent moments before, yet now it felt as though something unseen was stirring. A chill crawled down my spine as I turned back to the painting, my reflection caught in the glass. A shiver ran through me as I noticed something new. The girl's eyes, which had been staring straight ahead, were now looking directly at me. I stumbled back, my breath coming in short gasps. It had to be a trick of the light, an illusion caused by the dust-covered glass. But the longer I stared, the more certain I was that the change was real. The hallway seemed to stretch longer than before, the shadows deepening at the edges of my vision. A soft creaking echoed through the space, like footsteps on aging wood. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move, to turn away from the painting. But as I stepped back, a new detail caught my eye. Beneath the portrait, a brass plaque gleamed under layers of dust. My fingers trembled as I wiped it clean, revealing the name engraved into the metal. Eleanor Whitmore, 1836. The name meant nothing to me, yet dread curled in my stomach as if I should have known it. The air around me thickened, pressing in from all sides. I glanced down the hallway again, expecting emptiness, but instead, I saw a shadow standing at the far end. It was motionless, featureless, barely more than a dark smudge against the dim light. My breath hitched as it took a slow, deliberate step forward. I turned on my heel and hurried back toward the entrance, my heart hammering. The silence was no longer empty, but filled with a weight, a presence I couldn't explain. The grand doors loomed ahead, but as I reached for them, a whisper curled through the air, soft and beckoning. "Stay." The word brushed against my ear like breath, and my fingers faltered on the doorknob. I turned instinctively, my body reacting before my mind could stop me. The hallway was empty again, the shadow gone. But something had changed. I could feel it, deep in my bones. A gust of cold air swept through the house, and the door slammed shut on its own. My pulse spiked as I yanked at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The wall seemed closer now, the portraits looming over me with unseen eyes. Footsteps echoed once more, coming from the hallway I had just fled. I turned back, my gaze drawn once more to the painting of the family. The girl Eleanor was still looking at me, but now there was something new in her expression. Her lips had curled into the faintest hint of a smile. The whisper came again, stronger this time. "Come home." A sharp pain lanced through my head, sudden and blinding. Images flashed behind my eyes, memories that didn't belong to me. A house engulfed in fire, a woman screaming my name, hands pulling me away as I reached for something just out of grasp. The vision faded as quickly as it had come, leaving me gasping for air. The mansion felt different now, no longer just an abandoned relic, but something alive, something waiting. The doors refused to open, trapping me within its grasp. The shadows in the hallway deepened, shapes moving just beyond my vision. A single candle flickered to life on the table near the staircase, its flame steady despite the airless room. I turned toward it, drawn by an unseen force. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices speaking words I couldn't understand. My gaze fell back to the painting one last time. The girl's face had changed completely. Her features were no longer just similar to mine. They were mine, as if the painting had absorbed my reflection, replacing her entirely with me. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed the room was my own face staring back at me from the canvas. And then I felt myself being pulled in. Story 25. The amusement park had been abandoned for decades, left to rot beneath tangled vines and layers of dust. The entrance gate stood open, its rusted hinges groaning as the wind nudged it back and forth. Faded banners clung to their poles, their once bright colors now dull and tattered. The air smelled of damp wood and decaying metal, carrying a silence that felt far too heavy. I stepped onto the cracked pavement, my footsteps echoing through the empty park. Rides stood frozen in time, their frames rusted, their seats swaying slightly in the breeze. The carousel's horses were chipped and weathered, their painted eyes dull and lifeless. The ticket booth's glass was shattered, its counter covered in a thick layer of dust. Further in, I saw the Ferris wheel, its towering frame looming against the gray sky. Unlike the rest of the park, it was moving. The massive wheel turned slowly, its carts creaking as they swung back and forth. The sight sent a chill through me. There was no electricity here, no reason for it to be operating. I walked closer, drawn to the unnatural movement of the ride. The metal structure was rusted but sturdy, its carts hanging in eerie stillness despite the rotation. A single cart sat at the bottom, waiting as if inviting me to step inside. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself forward, gripping the edge as I climbed in. The cart lurched slightly, the wheel continuing its slow ascent. The height revealed more of the park, its forgotten attractions stretching out in eerie silence. From up here, I could see the overgrown pathways, the crumbling food stands, the skeletal remains of roller coasters overtaken by nature. Then my eyes caught something at the top of the wheel. A figure stood there, motionless, silhouetted against the sky. My breath caught in my throat as I stared, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure was tall, its limbs elongated, its posture unnervingly still. I couldn't make out its face, but I could feel its gaze locked onto me. The cart continued its climb, bringing me closer to the figure. My body tensed as unease settled deep into my bones. Every instinct screamed for me to jump, to escape before I reached the top. But my body refused to move, trapped by something beyond fear. As I neared the peak, the figure shifted slightly, its head tilting as if in acknowledgement. The closer I got, the more unnatural it seemed, its body too rigid, its presence too heavy. The air grew colder, thick with something I couldn't name. I gripped the metal bar of the cart, my fingers numb against the icy surface. The wheel came to a sudden stop. The cart swayed, leaving me suspended at the top. The figure stood just feet away now, close enough that I should have been able to see its features. But there was nothing, only darkness where a face should be, an emptiness that sent a sharp spike of dread through me. A sound broke the silence, a faint whisper carried by the wind. I couldn't make out the words, but they slithered through my ears, filling my mind with something cold and consuming. The figure moved closer, its steps slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. Panic surged through me as I yanked at the metal bar, desperate to escape. My breath came in short gasps, my heart hammering in my chest. The cart rocked violently, the entire wheel groaning as if protesting my movements. Below, the ground seemed impossibly far away. The figure reached for me, its shadow stretching unnaturally, curling toward me like grasping fingers. My body went rigid, an invisible force pressing against my chest, keeping me locked in place. The whisper grew louder, more urgent, wrapping around my thoughts like a vice. With every ounce of strength, I threw myself against the side of the cart, breaking free from whatever held me. My movement sent the cart swinging wildly, metal screeching as it fought against the strain. The figure loomed over me now, its presence unbearable, a weight that threatened to crush me. The Ferris wheel groaned, the structure shaking violently beneath us. The cart jerked downward, sending me lurching forward. For a split second, I thought I was going to fall, my fingers barely catching the edge as my body dangled over the abyss. The whispering turned to a roar, the sound pressing against my skull, filling my mind with something terrible and endless. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the Ferris wheel jolted back into motion. The cart descended rapidly, yanking me back inside. I gasped for air, my entire body trembling as I clung to the metal frame. The figure remained at the top, watching unmoving as I was carried downward. As soon as the cart reached the bottom, I stumbled out, my legs barely able to hold me. The Ferris wheel continued its slow, mechanical rotation, the cart I had just been in swaying slightly as if nothing had happened. My chest ached from the force of my breathing, my mind struggling to process what I had just seen. I turned back toward the top of the wheel, my eyes scanning for the figure. But it was gone. The sky above was empty, no shadow lingering where it had stood. The weight in the air had lifted, but something inside me knew it hadn't left. I staggered back, my instincts screaming at me to leave. The wind howled through the empty park, the rides groaning in response, as if waking from a long slumber. The silence that followed was worse, pressing in like the walls of a coffin. I didn't look back as I ran. The entrance gate stood open, waiting like a gaping mouth ready to swallow me whole. My footsteps pounded against the cracked pavement, each step taking me further from whatever had been waiting for me at the top of that wheel. As I reached my car, I hesitated, glancing one last time at the park. The Ferris wheel still turned, its metal frame creaking against the wind, and at the very top, barely visible against the sky, a shadow stood, watching. Story 26. The school had been abandoned for years, its windows shattered and its doors barely hanging onto their rusted hinges. Vines crept up the brick walls, swallowing the structure as nature reclaimed what had been left behind. The air inside was thick with dust, the scent of mildew and rotting wood clinging to every surface. My footsteps echoed down the empty hallways, the sound unnatural in the silence. The faded posters still clung to the peeling walls, their edges curling with age. Rows of rusted lockers lined the corridors, some left open, revealing tattered books and forgotten belongings. The fluorescent lights overhead had long since died, leaving only the dim glow of my flashlight to guide me. Every now and then, I swore I heard the faint creak of something shifting in the distance. I pushed open a classroom door, the hinges screeching in protest. Inside, the desks were covered in a thick layer of dust. The chairs scattered as if students had left in a hurry. A large chalkboard stretched across the front wall, the remnants of an old lesson still faintly visible. My eyes landed on a single desk near the window. Different from the others, it had a neat pile of books stacked on top, untouched by dust. Curious, I approached and ran my fingers over the covers. The books were old, their spines cracked, the pages yellowed with time. They looked like textbooks, but something about them felt off. As I reached for the top book, a cold chill crawled up my spine, the air suddenly feeling heavier. I flipped it open, my breath hitching as a slip of paper slid from between the pages. It fluttered onto the desk, the edges slightly curled. My name was scrawled in the center, the ink bold and uncomfortably familiar. Beneath it, in smaller, hurried letters, were two words that sent a shiver through me: "Don't leave." My throat tightened, and I quickly turned, scanning the room for any sign that I wasn't alone. The doorway remained empty, the hallway beyond shrouded in darkness. My heart pounded as I picked up the note, feeling the paper tremble between my fingers. Someone had written this, but how did they know my name? A floorboard creaked just outside the room. My breath caught as I froze, my grip on the note tightening. I turned my flashlight toward the doorway, the beam cutting through the dust-filled air. Nothing. The hall was as empty as before, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I stepped away from the desk, stuffing the note into my pocket. My skin tingled with unease as I slowly made my way back toward the door. The silence felt heavier now, almost oppressive. Another sound echoed down the corridor, a soft rustling, like someone shifting in the darkness. I stepped into the hallway, my flashlight flickering as I aimed it in both directions. The lockers stretched on endlessly, their doors slightly ajar like gaping mouths. A faint tapping sound drifted from farther down, rhythmic, deliberate. I wasn't alone. Swallowing hard, I turned back toward the entrance, deciding I had overstayed my welcome. But as I took a step, the sound of footsteps joined mine, slow, measured just a few feet behind me. My breath hitched, and I whirled around, shining the light directly behind me. There was nothing there. A cold dread settled in my stomach as I quickened my pace. The hallway felt longer now, stretching unnaturally, as if the school itself didn't want me to leave. I reached the main entrance and pushed against the doors, but they didn't budge. My pulse spiked as I shoved harder, the wood refusing to give. Behind me, the tapping sound grew louder, closer. I spun, my flashlight flickering again, casting erratic shadows along the walls. The lockers rattled suddenly, as if something had moved inside them. My breathing came in sharp gasps as I backed away from the doors, searching for another way out. A whisper slithered through the air, just barely audible. It was low, distant, but unmistakably real. I turned, shining my light toward the nearest classroom, my fingers trembling. The whisper came again, clearer this time, a single word that sent ice through my veins. Stay. I bolted. My feet pounded against the floor as I ran down the hallway, blindly turning corners, desperate to find an exit. The walls seemed to close in around me, the doors all locked, the windows too high to break. My breath came in ragged bursts as I stumbled into another room, slamming the door behind me. The projector at the front of the classroom flickered to life. My flashlight sputtered out, leaving only the eerie glow of the screen. My body went rigid as I saw what was playing. It was me, standing at the desk, reading the note. The footage was grainy, but there was no mistaking my face, my movements. Then the angle shifted. In the recording, a shadow moved behind me, just outside the classroom door. My stomach lurched as I saw myself stiffen, as if sensing something there. The figure in the footage lingered in the doorway for a long moment before stepping forward. My own breath hitched as the recording version of me slowly turned, flashlight trembling in my grip. But the thing behind me, it wasn't just a shadow. It was tall, unnaturally thin, its face blurred as if reality itself rejected it. And yet, it was watching me. The film cut to static. A slow creak filled the air behind me. My body locked up, every muscle frozen in fear. The air felt thick, heavy, pressing against my skin. I didn't want to turn around. The whisper came again, right against my ear this time, "Don't leave." I lunged for the nearest window, my body moving on instinct. I grabbed the chair beside me and hurled it at the glass. The window shattered with a deafening crash, the cold night air rushing in. Without a second thought, I pulled myself through, ignoring the shards that tore at my skin. I hit the ground hard, my breath knocked from my lungs. Scrambling to my feet, I didn't dare look back. I ran, the school looming behind me, its dark windows like watching eyes. The whisper still echoed in my mind, lingering even as I reached my car. As I drove away, I chanced one last glance in the rearview mirror. The school sat in silence, but in the second-floor window, something moved. A tall, thin figure stood there, watching. Even from a distance, I could hear the final whisper, carried by the wind. "You should have stayed." Story 27. The firehouse was nothing more than a skeleton of its former self, its walls cracked and covered in peeling paint. The front doors hung open, swaying slightly in the wind, revealing the dust-filled darkness beyond. The windows were shattered, jagged glass reflecting the dim afternoon light. The air smelled of mildew and old smoke, remnants of a place long forgotten. I stepped inside, my boots crunching against debris scattered across the floor. Old fire helmets and torn jackets were piled in one corner, their colors faded with age. The remnants of a desk sat near the back, its wood splintered and covered in dust. On its surface, a single set of keys rested, gleaming despite the decay around them. The sight of them sent a strange chill through me. I approached cautiously, my breath slow and steady, feeling the weight of something unseen pressing against me. The keys were arranged in a neat row, but one stood out from the rest. It had a small, tarnished tag attached to it, and when I brushed away the dust, I froze. My name was carved into the metal, the letters deep and precise. My stomach twisted as I turned it over in my fingers, trying to make sense of it. There was no reason for this key to exist, no explanation for how it ended up here. A slow unease settled in my chest, my heartbeat drumming in my ears. I scanned the room, suddenly hyper-aware of every shadow stretching along the walls. The key felt heavier than it should have, its cold surface pressing into my palm. My gaze landed on a door at the far end of the firehouse, its paint chipped and peeling. Something told me this was what the key belonged to. The thought sent a fresh wave of unease through me, but I couldn't ignore the pull. I walked toward the door, my footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust. The closer I got, the more I noticed the deep scratches on the wood, as if something had clawed at it from the inside. My fingers trembled slightly as I slid the key into the lock. The mechanism clicked smoothly, the sound too sharp in the stillness. I hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open, revealing a set of stairs descending into the darkness. A damp, earthy scent drifted up, mingling with the stagnant air of the firehouse. The steps stretched far below, disappearing into a void of black. A whisper of hesitation clawed at my mind, but curiosity pushed me forward. The air grew colder with each step, wrapping around me like unseen hands. The walls were lined with old bricks, damp and crumbling at the edges. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness, the beam swallowed up by the tunnel stretching ahead. The deeper I went, the heavier the silence became. It pressed against my ears, muting the sound of my footsteps. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading me further from the world above. I ran my fingers along the wall, feeling the rough texture beneath my touch, grounding myself in something real. Then, the passage opened into a larger space, the ceiling stretching higher above me. Rusted pipes ran along the walls, dripping with moisture that pooled on the floor. In the center of the room stood a single metal chair, its surface slick with condensation. Surrounding it were rows of filing cabinets, their drawers slightly open as if someone had been searching through them. I stepped closer, my breath catching in my throat. Papers were scattered across the floor, their edges curled with age. I picked one up, squinting at the faded ink. My name was there, written neatly at the top, along with dates I didn't recognize. My hands tightened around the paper, my pulse pounding in my ears. I flipped through more documents, each one filled with details about my life, places I had been, people I had met. There were even entries from years ago, moments I barely remembered but were recorded with eerie accuracy. Panic surged through me as I turned to the final page. A date was written there, tomorrow's date, with no further details. The air in the room shifted, growing impossibly still. A soft creak echoed from the tunnel behind me, the sound of something moving in the darkness. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm as I backed away from the chair. The weight of unseen eyes bore into me, prickling against my skin. Then, a sound low and deliberate like footsteps dragging against the damp floor. I spun toward the tunnel, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The beam barely illuminated the passage, but I could see the faint outline of a figure standing just beyond the reach of the light. It didn't move, didn't breathe, only watched. Every muscle in my body screamed to run, but I remained frozen. The figure stepped forward, and as it did, the light flickered, distorting its shape. The air thickened, a suffocating pressure filling the space. I took a slow step back, my mind racing for a way out. Then, the lights above me, lights I hadn't even realized were there, flashed once and then died, plunging the room into absolute darkness. My pulse roared in my ears as I fumbled for my phone, desperate for any source of light. The footsteps resumed, quicker this time, closing the distance between us. I bolted. My feet pounded against the floor as I ran back through the tunnel, my hands scraping against the rough walls. The air behind me grew colder, the presence pressing closer with every step. I didn't dare look back, didn't want to see what was chasing me. The stairs came into view and I pushed myself harder, lungs burning as I ascended. My fingers wrapped around the edge of the doorway as I hurled myself through, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands fumbled with the lock, twisting the key with trembling fingers until it finally clicked into place. Silence. The oppressive weight in the air vanished, leaving me gasping for breath. I stumbled back, my body shaking, my mind struggling to make sense of what had just happened. The firehouse remained still, untouched, as if nothing had ever disturbed it. I forced myself to move, gripping the keys tightly as I rushed outside. The evening air hit me like a wave, fresh and cool, but it did little to calm my nerves. I turned back once, staring at the broken structure, knowing I had found something that was never meant to be uncovered. The key was still in my hand, its metal burning against my skin. I didn't know who had left it for me, or why, but one thing was clear. Something down there had been waiting, and now it knew my name. Story 28. The mansion stood at the end of a long, winding driveway, its towering silhouette framed by gnarled trees. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and overgrown grass, the remnants of an estate left to rot. Its windows, dark and hollow, seemed to watch me as I approached, the heavy front doors slightly ajar. A deep sense of unease settled in my chest, but curiosity pushed me forward. Stepping inside, the scent of dust and decay filled my lungs, the wooden floors creaking beneath my weight. The grand entryway was lined with faded portraits, their subjects staring down with vacant, judging eyes. Cobwebs stretched across the high ceiling, their delicate threads shimmering in the dim light. A chill clung to the air, pressing against my skin like an unseen hand. I moved further in, my footsteps muted by the thick layer of dust covering the floor. The silence was oppressive, as if the house itself was holding its breath. A grand staircase loomed to my left, its banister carved with intricate details now dulled by time. To my right, a door stood slightly open, revealing the faint glow of firelight flickering within. Drawn by the unexpected warmth, I pushed the door open and stepped into a parlor room. The fire in the grand stone fireplace crackled softly, casting long shadows across the walls. Bookshelves lined the room, their contents sagging with age, their spines coated in dust. At the center of it all sat a rocking chair, moving back and forth with a slow, rhythmic creak. My breath caught in my throat as I scanned the room. The chair was moving, but there was no one in it. I stood frozen in place, my pulse hammering against my ribs, my mind scrambling for a logical explanation. A draft, perhaps, some trick of the old house settling. But the movement was too deliberate, too steady. I took a cautious step forward, the floor groaning beneath me. The chair continued to rock, its wooden runners gliding effortlessly against the warm rug. The fire flickered, casting shifting shadows across the walls, making it feel as though the room itself was breathing. I reached out a trembling hand, my fingers just inches from the chair's curved armrest. Before I could touch it, the chair slowed, its movement growing sluggish until it finally stopped. The room felt suddenly smaller, the fire's warmth replaced by an unnatural cold. A heavy silence fell over me, pressing against my ears, making the air feel thick and stifling. My breath came out in a slow, shaky exhale as I forced myself to step back. Something was here. I couldn't see it, couldn't hear it, but I could feel it, a presence lingering just beyond my perception. The sensation of being watched crept up my spine, settling at the base of my neck like an icy weight. My eyes darted across the room, searching for any sign of movement, but the only thing that had changed was the chair, now completely still. A sudden sound shattered the silence, a single, sharp creak from the floor behind me. Every muscle in my body tensed, my breath catching in my throat. I turned slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it echo in my ears. The doorway was empty, but the feeling of something unseen standing just beyond it made my skin crawl. I swallowed hard, forcing my feet to move, retreating step by step toward the exit. My fingers brushed against the edge of a wooden side table, sending a cloud of dust into the air. The moment I reached the doorway, a gust of air swept through the room, extinguishing the fire in an instant. The sudden darkness swallowed me whole, leaving only the faint glow of the dying embers. Panic surged through me, my hands fumbling for the wall as I backed into the hallway. The oppressive silence had returned, stretching out endlessly, making every tiny sound feel deafening. My pulse thundered as I forced myself to turn away from the parlor, my only thought now to leave this house and never return. The hallway felt longer than before, the walls seeming to close in around me as I moved. My footsteps sounded foreign, too loud, as if they weren't entirely my own. The mansion groaned, the wood shifting beneath my weight, whispering in voices too low to understand. My fingers brushed against the banister of the grand staircase as I passed, and a sudden chill raced up my arm. A soft creak echoed from the parlor behind me. The chair. It was moving again. The realization sent a bolt of ice through my veins, my mind screaming at me not to look. I quickened my pace, my breaths coming out in short, panicked bursts as I neared the front door. As I reached for the handle, the sensation of something just behind me grew unbearable. The air pressed against my back, thick and unmoving, as though something was standing inches away, waiting. My fingers closed around the cold metal knob, twisting it frantically, my heart hammering as the door finally groaned open. The night air rushed in, crisp and damp, chasing away the suffocating presence inside. I stumbled onto the porch, gasping for breath, my body trembling from the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. The mansion loomed behind me, its dark windows reflecting nothing, revealing nothing. I stepped back, the wooden boards creaking beneath my weight, my eyes locked onto the doorway. The silence stretched on, thick and expectant, as if the house was waiting for me to make a mistake. Then, from deep within, the sound of the rocking chair creaking once more sent me sprinting down the overgrown path without looking back. Story 29. The hospital stood at the edge of town, its windows shattered and its exterior covered in layers of peeling paint. Vines had crept up the walls, wrapping around rusted metal bars and broken signs. The air smelled of damp concrete and decay. the scent of time forgotten. I hesitated before stepping inside, the darkness beyond the entrance swallowing the dim evening light. The lobby was vast, with a reception desk covered in dust and old papers scattered across the floor. Wheelchairs sat abandoned in the corners, their wheels locked in place by years of neglect. A broken gurney rested against the far wall, its metal frame rusted and worn. The silence was thick, punctuated only by the distant creak of shifting wood. I walked down the main hallway, my footsteps echoing off the tile floor. Faded signs labeled various wings: emergency, radiology, surgery. Most of the doors were either missing or barely hanging on their hinges. The deeper I went, the stronger the feeling of being watched grew, though the hospital was long abandoned. Reaching a side corridor, I noticed a row of photographs mounted on the wall, covered in a thick layer of dust. Brushing the surface with my sleeve, I revealed black and white images of patients, doctors, and surgeries in progress. Each face looked solemn, frozen in time, their expressions devoid of warmth. A chill ran through me as I continued examining them, something about the sequence unsettling. The final photograph caught my attention immediately. It showed a man lying on an operating table, his body covered in a surgical drape. The doctors surrounding him wore outdated masks and gloves, their eyes focused on their work. My breath hitched as I stared at the patient's face. It was mine. Every detail, from the shape of the nose to the small scar near the eyebrow, was identical. My chest tightened as I stepped back, my mind struggling to rationalize what I was seeing. Dust swirled in the dim light, the air suddenly feeling too thick to breathe. I turned to leave, but a faint sound stopped me in my tracks, a soft shuffle, like feet dragging against tile. My pulse quickened as I peered down the hallway, but it remained empty. A flickering light above me buzzed to life, casting erratic shadows along the walls. The air grew colder, my breath now visible in front of me. The hallway felt different, as though it had shifted in some way I couldn't explain. Then the sound came again, closer this time, just around the corner. I forced myself to move, my legs stiff as I crept forward. The hallway stretched longer than I remembered, the doors on either side now slightly ajar. A gurney rested in the middle of the path, though I hadn't noticed it before. The sheet covering it was stained, the fabric appearing freshly disturbed. A distant voice, low and distorted, whispered something I'd understand. It came from one of the darkened rooms ahead, slipping through the heavy silence like a breath against my ear. My hands trembled as I reached for the door frame, peering inside. The room was small, lined with rusted cabinets and shattered glass. The scent of something metallic lingered in the air. A single operating table stood in the center, its leather straps frayed but still intact. Above it, an old surgical lamp swayed slightly, its rusted bolts creaking. I felt my stomach drop as I noticed the scattered medical tools nearby, their edges glinting under the weak light. The table was positioned exactly like the one in the photograph, the resemblance uncanny. A sharp bang echoed from the hallway, and I spun around, my heart hammering. One of the doors had slammed shut, sending dust into the air. The lights overhead flickered violently, casting long, shifting shadows along the walls. Then, from behind me, the whispering returned closer now, just beside my ear. My breath caught as I turned back toward the operating table. The photograph I had seen on the wall was now lying on it, as if someone had placed it there intentionally. My own face stared up at me, the image unchanged yet now covered in fresh fingerprints. The weight of unseen eyes pressed down on me, my entire body tense with dread. The whispering grew into a chorus of voices, overlapping and urgent. The air thickened, the cold sinking deep into my bones. Then, the sound of rusted wheels screeched through the hall, the gurney from before shifting slightly. My mind screamed for me to run, yet my feet refused to move. A door burst open at the far end of the hallway, slamming into the wall with enough force to shake the floor. A shadowed figure stood in the doorway, its form indistinct yet undeniably human. I took a step back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The figure didn't move, but I could feel its gaze locked onto me. The lights above me burst, plunging everything into darkness. The only sound was my own breathing, rapid and uneven. Then, a hand cold and clammy brushed against my arm, sending a jolt of terror through me. I stumbled backward, my body finally responding, and ran toward the nearest exit. The hall seemed endless, twisting in ways that didn't make sense. Every door I passed was now sealed shut, as if the building itself refused to let me leave. The whispers followed me, growing frantic, filling my ears until I could barely think. My chest burned as I forced myself forward, my only goal to escape. Finally, I reached the main lobby, the entrance doors still open. I didn't dare look back as I sprinted outside, the cool night air hitting me like a wave. My legs nearly gave out, but I kept running until the hospital was far behind me. The whispers faded, swallowed by the night, yet the weight of unseen eyes remained. I didn't stop until I reached my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys. The moment the engine roared to life, I sped away, not daring to look at the rearview mirror. The hospital shrank in the distance, its dark silhouette blending into the night. But even as I drove, the unease never left me. Days passed, yet sleep refused to come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the image of myself on the operating table. The details burned into my mind, impossible to forget. Then, one morning, an envelope appeared on my doorstep, containing only a single photograph. It was the same image as before, but this time the eyes of the patient were open, and they were staring directly at me. Story 30. The entrance to the abandoned subway station was hidden behind a crumbling brick wall, barely noticeable beneath layers of graffiti. The air was thick with dust, the scent of mildew clinging to every surface. As I stepped inside, the echoes of my footsteps bounced off the tiled walls, filling the silence with an eerie rhythm. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered weakly, casting long shadows that twisted unnaturally along the floor. The platform stretched into darkness, its edges blurred by thick grime and neglect. A rusted train sat motionless on the tracks, its exterior coated in dirt, its windows fogged with age. The sight of it sent a chill through me. It looked as if it had been waiting, untouched and forgotten, yet impossibly intact. My pulse quickened as I stepped closer, my shoes scraping against the tile, the sound swallowed by the heavy silence. As I neared the train, the overhead lights buzzed violently, flashing in rapid succession. A mechanical hum stirred within the car, low and uneven, as the train's interior lights sputtered to life. The sudden glow revealed cracked seats and shattered glass, the remnants of a time long past. But it wasn't the decay that made my breath hitch, it was the figure sitting in one of the seats, completely still. The figure was shadowed, their face obscured by the dim light in the grime-streaked window. They sat motionless, hands resting on their lap, as if they had been waiting. My stomach twisted as an unnatural stillness filled the air, pressing against my skin. Something about them was wrong, too rigid, too silent, like a forgotten mannequin abandoned in an empty store. A slow creak echoed through the station as the train doors slid open, their rusted hinges groaning in protest. A wave of stale air rolled out, thick with dust and something faintly metallic. My body screamed at me to turn back, to leave, but my feet remained rooted in place. The figure inside remained unmoving, their posture unchanged, yet I felt their attention shift toward me. Hesitation clawed at my throat as I stepped forward, my heart pounding against my ribs. The floor of the train gave a slight shudder beneath my weight, the sensation unnatural, like something beneath the metal was alive. The air grew heavier, pressing against my lungs, making each breath feel strained. I gripped the edge of a nearby seat for balance, my fingers brushing against something damp and sticky. I recoiled, my breath catching in my throat as I wiped my hand against my jacket. The dim light revealed the smeared crimson stain now staining the fabric. My pulse roared in my ears as I forced myself to look up, my gaze locking onto the figure. They had not moved, not even an inch, yet I felt their presence wrapping around me, suffocating in its intensity. A sound crackled through the train's intercom, sharp and distorted, like a voice trying to push through layers of static. The words were lost in the interference, fragmented and broken, but the tone was unmistakable, commanding, expectant. The figure shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. A tilt of the head, a slight movement of the shoulders, as if acknowledging my arrival. The train lurched, a deep groan reverberating through its rusted frame as the doors slammed shut behind me. My stomach dropped as the platform outside blurred, the train moving forward despite its decayed state. Panic seized my chest as I stumbled toward the doors, my fingers clawing at the handle. It refused to budge, as if sealed by something beyond rust and time. A whisper brushed against my ear, soft and distant, yet chillingly clear. My name, spoken with familiarity, with purpose. My breath came in short gasps as I turned back toward the figure, my entire body rigid with dread. They were no longer seated. The seat was empty, the indentation of their presence still visible in the torn fabric. The air around me felt charged, humming with an energy I couldn't comprehend. The overhead lights flickered violently, plunging the train into brief moments of complete darkness. Each time the light returned, the shadows seemed to shift, growing closer, more defined. A metallic rattle echoed from further down the train, followed by the slow, deliberate creak of footsteps. I strained to see, my vision blurring as my fear grew unbearable. The whisper returned, surrounding me, weaving through the air like an unseen force. It was no longer distant, it was right beside me. The air turned ice cold as my breath left visible puffs in the dim light. A figure loomed at the far end of the car, half hidden in the flickering shadows. Its form was twisted, unnatural, as if something human had been stretched and reshaped into something else. My muscles locked, every instinct screaming at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The train shuddered violently, the sound of metal scraping against metal filling the space like a wail. The figure began to move, each step slow and deliberate, its presence warping the air around it. My vision swam as the walls of the train seemed to ripple, distorting like a reflection in a broken mirror. A sharp jolt sent me stumbling backward, my back slamming against a seat. Pain flared through my ribs, but I barely registered it. The figure was closer now, close enough that I could see the edges of its face shifting, struggling to form something recognizable. It was a face I knew, my own. A deafening screech filled the train as it came to an abrupt halt. The impact threw me forward, the world spinning as my body crashed onto the floor. The lights above exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging everything into suffocating darkness. The whispers grew, layering over each other, a chorus of my own voice calling me, urging me deeper. The doors burst open, the rush of stagnant air nearly knocking me back. My body moved on instinct, my legs propelling me forward before I could think. I stumbled onto the platform, collapsing onto the cold tile, my lungs burning. The train sat motionless, its rusted exterior unchanged, its interior swallowed by darkness. The figure was gone. The whispers had ceased. The air was still, as if nothing had happened. I scrambled to my feet, my hands shaking as I backed away from the train, my mind racing to make sense of what I had just witnessed. As I turned to leave, my eyes caught something in the reflection of a shattered advertisement panel. A figure standing just behind me, watching, waiting. The platform light flickered, and when I looked again, it was gone.